Chapter 151, The Sea Race Diplomatic Mission. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Your Highness, the High Priest is busy, and won't be able to receive you for the time being. It would be better if the two of you stay in the Green Tooth Palace for a couple of days. What's your opinion about this? Wu Lan turned his head towards Princess Huo Wu and said. Thank you so much, Lord Wu Lan. I accept your invitation, Princess Huo Wu replied with a faint smile. Wu Lan put away the white jade token, and turned around to lead the way. Shi Mu and Princess Huo Wu followed closely behind him, and quickly disappeared into the depths of the barrack. The three people were advancing on a 10 feet wide mountain passage. The entire passage was carved from white rock. Princess Huo Wu was riding on the back of a barbarian horse. However, she still seemed shorter than Wu Lan. Shi Mu was riding on his David's deer. He was neither far, nor close behind Princess Huo Wu. He was looking around at the surroundings as he moved forward. Lord Wu Lan, thank you so much for your help. Otherwise, the consequences would have been too horrible. Princess Huo Wu cupped her hands, and said with a grateful expression on her face. Your Highness, you're welcome. I'm just following orders, Wu Lan waved his hand and replied. May I ask who gives you the orders? Princess Huo Wu asked in a calm manner. He. The master priest of the Green Tooth tribe Lord Yanyi, Wu Lan chuckled and replied. Princess Huo Wu's expression didn't change as she heard this. The vicious barbarians and peaceful barbarians didn't get along. Princess Huo Wu had guessed from the green tooth necklace in Wu Lan's neck that he belonged to the Green Tooth tribe of peaceful barbarians. A quarter of an hour later, Shi Mu and the princess arrived at a residing platform that was situated halfway up on the mountain under the guidance of Wu Lan. A small and green palace stood at this place. Shi Mu and Princess Huo Wu walked towards the palace under the guidance of Wu Lan. The two riders reached outside the hall of the palace. The palace was looked after by a barbarian servant. A slim old master priest sat upright on a seat in the hall. He was wearing a green gown. He had a strong aura around him, like that of a deep sea. Shi Mu and Princess Huo Wu felt a shiver in their heart as they entered the hall. Lord Yanyi, this is Huo Wu of the Dachi Kingdom. Thank you for sending a man to help us. Princess Huo Wu took a step forward. She then put a hand on her chest, and bowed in a greeting ritual of the barbarian race. Shi Mu also followed Princess Huo Wu, and greeted the master priest. Wu Lan stepped forward, and passed the white jade order token to Princess Huo Wu. She then handed it over to Yanyi, and stood respectfully. You're welcome, Princess. Please sit down. The old man did it because I don't want the vicious barbarian race and the sea race to get away with their conspiracies. Priest Yanyi didn't look at the emissary token in his hand. Instead, he waved at both of them. He then spoke up with a smile. Sea race. Princess Huo Wu raised her elegant eyebrow. She then asked in surprised manner. Princess, you may not be aware of it. But, the newly reputed female saint Xiang Zhu of the sea race brought a messenger's troop to the White Horse Mountain 7 days ago. They invited me to collaborate with the sea race in order to cope with the human race together. So, we the priests of the 8 big tribes called the High Priest and assembled in the Holy Mountain. He is busy regarding this matter only, Priest Yanyi explained. Princess Huo Wu's complexion changed. The 3 kingdoms would be attacked by the enemies from 3 sides if the sea race and the barbarian race joined hands. Then, the situation would be impossible to tackle. Lord Yanyi, I don't think that you would approve of it, considering your relationship with the sea race. Princess Huo Wu calmed herself down. Her beautiful eyes flashed as she spoke. He. I didn't know that the princess knows so much. You're right. My Green Tooth tribe is one of the 4 big tribes of peaceful barbarians, and is the same as the other 3 tribes. The inhabitants of the place near the East Sea have harbored a great hatred towards the sea race for generations. It's natural that we won't join hands with the sea race, Priest Yanya shot a glance at Princess Huowu in admiration and explained. May I ask your holiness, what's the opinion of the high priest regarding the sea race union? Princess Huowu asked after pondering for a moment. The 4 tribes of the vicious barbarians stand for the sea race union. And, we the 4 tribes of the peaceful barbarians have negative opinion about it. So, it's hard for the high priest to make a decision at this moment. Hehe, the princess has come at the right time, Priest Yanya said with a smile. Many thanks to your holiness for mentioning this. This young girl will surely try her best. Princess Huowu cupped her hands and bowed. Princess, only 2 of you are on this mission, right? Priest Yanya shot a glance at Shi Mu and asked. This isn't the case. We set off for this journey as soon as the Dachi kingdom told us. Princess Huowu didn't hide anything about her mission from the priest, apart from Shi Mu's identity. She told him how her entire troop had been wiped out by the earth-ranked creature from the sea race. Priest Yanya wrinkled his brows as he heard this. However, he remained silent. Princess, your words indicate that the strong creature from the sea race looked a bit like the first warrior Zhagu of the fierce snake tribe. This man's weapon was a dark snake whip which has been condensed from the deep green sea snake with the help of martial magic, Priest Yanya said after a while. Shi Mu and Princess Huowu looked at each other as they heard this. They felt a shiver in their hearts as they secretly feared the scene that they had seen under the mountain. Oh! By the way, a wisp of dark green real qi is still left in your body. It has been suppressed by you, but it would still be a huge risk to let it be this way. It'll do as much damage as a fish bone in the throat. The old man here has a small yin quelling pill. It'll help you to get rid of it completely. Priest Yanya turned his hand and took out a wooden box. He then handed it over to Princess Huowu. Your Holiness, thanks a lot. Princess Huowu's complexion became bright as she received it. Princess Huowu and Priest Yanya then chatted for a while. After that, Shi Mu and the princess took their leave. The servant standing outside the hall led the 2 people to 2 adjacent stone chambers for them to reside in. There were 3 rooms in Shi Mu's chamber. It was spacious and finely decorated. It seemed like a guest house. Knock. A soft sound of knocking came from the door. Shi Mu opened the door and saw Tian Huowu standing outside. Princess Huowu, please come in. Shi Mu invited her into the chamber with a smile on his face. I've told you many times that there's no need to call me princess. Just call me Huowu. Huowu looked at Shi Mu and said. Shi Mu closed the door and smiled. But, he remained silent. The 2 people entered the living room of the stone chamber, and sat down. They both smiled, but didn't say anything for a while. The sea race has arrived at the White Horse Holy Mountain. I'm afraid it won't be simple to form an alliance through these discussions. There was a frustrated expression on Princess Huowu's face. She sighed and explained. The sea race was extremely wild. They had rushed to the Holy Mountain in 7 days to grab this opportunity. Moreover, the strength and imposing manner of the female saint, the leader of this sea race, wasn't poor. But, the human race only had 2 people, Princess Huowu and Shi Mu. Their strength would unavoidably appear weaker. The human race was at a great disadvantage, regardless of the partial inclination of the barbarian race. Therefore, Princess Huowu was rightly dispirited. As Priest Yanya said, the barbarian race still has internal dispute regarding this matter. It's not confirmed that we don't have any chance, Shi Mu looked at her and said. I hope so, Huowu nodded. Her complexion turned a little clear. The discussions are going to be very complex in this situation. I had promised Brother Shi that I'll talk to the high priest about the matter of your secret art of totem of the fierce snake tribe. But, I'm afraid that we'd have to set this matter aside for the time being. But, I promise you that I'll mention this in front of the high priest whenever I get an appropriate chance. Huowu's beautiful eyes exposed a trace of regret. She then said in an assuring manner. The princess still remembers this matter? We can put off this matter until an effective outcome has come out of the discussion. In that case, Shi Mu replied with a faint smile. Be assured, brother Shi. I'm a woman of my word. I'll surely fulfill my promise, Princess Huowu said in a relaxed tone. Thanks a lot, Princess, Shi Mu nodded and said. Princess Huowu didn't stay for long. She soon took her leave. It seemed as if she was in a hurry. Shi Mu returned to his bedroom and sat down. He was currently regarded as Princess Huowu's bodyguard by the barbarians. So, it wouldn't help to discuss this matter in a hurry. Moreover, there was that man from the fierce snake tribe on the holy mountain, it was necessary to fear him. So, Shi Mu didn't dare to act blindly without thinking. Shi Mu took off the clothes from his upper body. The totem on his chest was covered in a layer of blue light. The python totem didn't look unusual. Shi Mu felt relaxed as he saw this. That man from the fierce snake tribe hadn't been able to sense his totem curse. It seemed that the blood of the forest viper had been effective in concealing the aura of the totem curse. Shi Mu put on his clothes. But, he didn't have a relaxed expression on his face. Princess Huowu's behavior felt mysterious the next day. She didn't stay in her room throughout the day. She had been frequently meeting with the important people of the barbarian race. So, she had rarely come across Shi Mu. Shi Mu stayed in his chamber, he didn't go out. He didn't even see anyone apart from a few barbarian servants who took care of his daily needs. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. The entire mountain seemed tranquil, without any unusual happenings. Shi Mu gradually let the thought pass, and came out of his residing place. There seemed to be no guard in the hall where Shi Mu and Princess Huowu had been residing. The place seemed to be stranded. Shi Mu couldn't even see a single shadow. Shi Mu soon arrived at the main door of the hall. He was about to step out. Hey, are you warrior Shi of the human race mission? A young voice was heard from behind him. Shi Mu turned his head, and saw a barbarian youth in a green priest gown coming from the main hall with a smile on his face. I'm Shi Mu, your holiness. And, you're? Shi Mu raised his brow and asked. He. My name is Min Tu. I'm a low-level priest of the Green-Tooth tribe. Lord Yanya got to know that warrior Shi Mu is going to move around the holy mountain. So, he sent me to be your guide. Many areas of the holy mountain are prohibited for strangers. Some areas still possess witch magic. So, it's extremely dangerous to trespass them. Min Tu had a grave look on his face as he explained in a serious voice. Shi Mu felt surprised. He hadn't expected that people had been keeping a close watch over his movements. So, this is the case. Priest Min Tu, I'm sorry to trouble you. I've heard about the landscape of the holy mountain. So, I wish to see every place, Shi Mu spoke up with a faint smile. His eyes flashed. A golden glow appeared before his eyes as he looked into the surroundings. His body trembled. He then quickly glanced at the corner on top of the room. A piece of a fist-sized black crystal stone was embedded there. It was emitting mild rays of light. A spirit power was also fluctuating out of it. He would have never noticed this if he didn't have a powerful eyesight. So, it's used for surveillance. Shi Mu thought in his heart. He then heaved a sigh of relief. No need to be polite, warrior Shi Mu. Min Tu's eyes brightened up. He then led the way. Min Tu seemed to be quite interested in Shi Mu. His attitude was extremely polite. He took Shi Mu to visit every place. The top of the holy mountain was full of shrines and mines that had been constructed in rough and bold barbarian style. The style of the human race was quite different from that. Min Tu explained stories behind every hall, every building, and every wall painting to Shi Mu throughout the tour. Min Tu seemed to be a little curious about the human race, so, he continued to inquire about several things from Shi Mu from time to time. Shi Mu was following his own chain of thoughts. But, he answered all the questions. Min Tu seemed to be impressed by Shi Mu. Chapter 152, Multi-Headed Vicious Python. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Brother Min knows a lot about the human race. I admire that you are so knowledgeable, Shi Mu said with sincere admiration. Brother Shi is overpraising me. I've been defending this holy snow palace as a guard priest of the Holy Land for years. In fact, I've never been to the outside world. But, I've read various ancient history books and records. Min Tu smiled and said. Oh. So, the Holy Snow Palace has a library? I don't know if I'd be allowed to go there, and look around. Shi Mu's eyes brightened as he asked. Min Tu's face revealed traces of hesitation as he heard this. He apologized and said, I'm afraid that it's not possible. Even the families of the 8 big tribes don't have permission to flip through the books of the palace's library. This rule has been set up by the high priest, it's been followed for generations. Warrior Shi is a noble guest of the holy mountain. But, I can't make an exception, even for you. Shi Mu nodded with disappointment. But, Warrior Shi Mu can talk to me if he has any doubt. I can go to the library and get the information. Min Tu sighed as he saw that Shi Mu didn't insist. He then said in an embarrassed tone. There's nothing like that. But, I'm a little curious about what I've heard and seen during my journey since I entered this wasteland. A variety of colors appeared in Shi Mu's eyes. Then, he and Min Tu started to move forward while discussing about various customs and sentiments of the barbarian race. Min Tu felt relaxed. He then began to explain the doubts that Shi Mu had raised. Shi Mu eventually raised the topic of the secret totem art of the barbarian race. The secret totem art was the foundation of the barbarian race. So, Min Tu spoke very cautiously about it. Then, he began to ask Shi Mu questions about the exercises and cultivation methods in the human martial art. Shi Mu answered everything as if he had been caught unprepared. This left Min Tu flabbergasted. However, Min Tu hadn't answered Shi Mu's questions about the secret totem art. Therefore, Min Tu gradually started to talk in a continuous manner without any hesitation. The two men continued to walk slowly. They finally arrived at a secret place and stopped. They were talking about the totem arts of the barbarian race and martial arts of human race. Both of them had gained a lot of knowledge from talking to each other. Min Tu was especially interested in knowing about the spirit powers and charms of the human race. And, Shi Mu answered his questions in a generous manner. In fact, he even displayed several low-level techniques in front of Min Tu. Moreover, he gave 2 low-level magic charms to Min Tu in order to examine. Min Tu was a low-level priest of the barbarian race. So, he was an equivalent of a magician apprentice of the human race. Moreover, he only asked a few usual questions, nothing secret. Warrior Shi is so generous. Even the noblest of charm masters wouldn't have shared these secrets with me. Please ask me if there's anything you wish to inquire. Min Tu looked at the magic charms in his hand. Traces of various colors could be seen in his eyes. He remained silent for a moment. He then returned the magic charms to Shi Mu and said. I don't know if Brother Min Tu would tell me, but there's indeed something that I wish to ask. Shi Mu received the magic charm with a faint smile. He then said after a moment's silence. There's no harm in saying what you think. I'll not hide the information from you if I'm capable of answering your question, Min Tu replied with a dignified complexion. I wonder if Brother Min Tu has heard of the eternally doomed soul curse. Shi Mu didn't beat around the bush and asked directly. Min Tu raised his brows and exposed a surprised look on his face. Brother Min's expressions tells that he must know something about this totem curse. Shi Mu felt delighted in his heart, but didn't expose anything on his face. He then said, as far as I know, this curse must belong to the fierce snake tribe, one of the 8 big tribes. This isn't a secret in the 8 big tribes of the barbarian race. There are some similar witchcraft curses. But, this kind of witchcraft curse is banned in my Green-Tooth tribe. These kind of curses are strictly prohibited to practice among my clan's people. I too have only read about it in the library of the Holy Snow Palace. I wonder what Brother Shi wants to know about it, Min-tu nodded and explained in a hesitant manner. I wish to know about the methods of getting rid of this curse. Brother Min, please be generous and advise me, Shi Mu spoke with a serious expression on his face. Can it be that Brother Shi is affected by this curse? Min-tu was flabbergasted. Shi Mu forced a smile, but didn't conceal anything, except for a few details. He told him about the course of events in rough manner, and how he got the totem curse on his body. Shi Mu had a gathered clear picture about Min-tu before he had told him his story. He knew that Min-tu had been living in the Holy Snow Palace since his childhood, and didn't have much contact with the outside world. So, he was quite simple. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to speak about this matter in front of him. As far as I know, there are only two methods to get rid of the eternally doomed soul curse. One is to ask an earth-ranked expert to exert formidable seal on the curse. Min-tu listened to Shi Mu's story with a grave look on his face. He then said with hesitation, I already know about the two ways that Brother Min just told me. I was unable to accomplish the first method. So, I've come to the Holy Mountain as a bodyguard of Princess Huo Wu. I wish to refer to the second method to break this curse, Shi Mu sighed and said. For this, you must kill a vicious beast soul like a large snake while practicing the secret totem art of the fierce snake tribe, Min-tu answered after a moment's silence. I understand. But, it's a matter of life and death. So, I'll have to fight with all my efforts, Shi Mu sighed and said. I can't help you much in this matter. Can you show me the totem on your body, so that I can determine what kind of a vicious beast soul is sealed on your body? Min-tu nodded. He then sighed and said. Shi Mu had got what he had been seeking for. The two men returned to Shi Mu's room. Shi Mu took off his upper cloth and showed the python totem on his chest. Min-tu's complexion changed as he saw the fierce totem in fiery red color on Shi Mu's chest. His complexion turned even more serious once he identified the totem. He then looked at Shi Mu with pity in his eyes. Brother Min needn't worry. Tell me what you think, Shi Mu's heart sank as he spoke. I won't hide anything from you. The beast that's sealed inside as the totem curse on your body is a variant of a well-known ominous beast of our wasteland. It's a multiple-headed python. This beast is the lowest-ranked python with one head. Its strength is no less than a consummate-level Houtian warrior. So, Brother Shi will have to kill a multi-headed vicious python if he wants to suppress the power of the curse on his body. But, only two vicious pythons can possess the strength equivalent to an initial stage Xian warrior, Min-tu sighed. He then shook his head and explained. If that's the case, then I've no other choice but to do this. But I don't know where to find a multi-headed vicious python in this wilderness. Can Brother Min tell me? Shi Mu wasn't surprised by Min-tu's words. Instead, he asked in an unhurried tone. The multi-headed vicious python had become extinct from this land several hundred years ago. Now, Brother Shi can only ask a Xian warrior to help him. But, I'm afraid that you can't kill the beast soul. Min-tu remained silent for a while. He then said. Shi Mu's expression became uncertain. But, there's another place in the wasteland where this beast may exist. It's called the Portal of the Brave Warrior. The man from the fierce snake tribe, whom Brother Shi had killed, might have received the soul of the vicious beast from there. But, that portal is a forbidden area, and is probably closed for a while. Moreover, they wouldn't allow a stranger like Brother Shi to enter the portal even if it's open. Min-tu spoke with a sense of hesitation. Shi Mu's expressions became gloomy. Min-tu was disturbed to see Shi Mu's expression. He chatted with Shi Mu for some more time. After that, he left. Grey clouds were rolling up endlessly in the sky. Black wind was blowing ferociously. A dull grey peace seemed to be sinking between the earth and the heaven. There was a basin surrounded by several ash-grey hills under the dark sky. Dust and smoke was rolling up from the place. Sounds of killing and attacking were coming out of the smoke. Pieces of shattered human skeletons were scattered everywhere inside the basin. More than 10 human skeletons could be seen fighting with each other. Some of these skeletons were wielding bone swords, the others had bone axes, bone spears and bone hammers in their hands. A few of them were bare-handed. A green-colored soul flame was flashing in the eye sockets of every skeleton. These skeletons seemed to be in a crazed state. They didn't seem to be worried about the number of bones that had been knocked off from their bodies. Instead, they continued to launch attacks on each other till the time they fell apart. A lofty skeleton dodged to avoid the attack of the skeleton that stood in front of it. It held a bone spear in its hand. It took 2 steps forward, and waved its bone weapon. It then severed the skeleton from its waist. But then, a creature came from the side, and smashed with its left hand. There was with a leg bone in its hand. Bang! A loud and clear sound echoed. The left arm of the lofty skeleton had been broken. The lofty skeleton turned around, and slashed downwards. The skeleton holding a leg bone in its hand also hacked downwards. It didn't seem to be weak. In fact, it took apart its own rib, and started to fight with the lofty skeleton. These 10 skeletons continued to slaughter in a crazy and monotonous manner. 5 or 6 skeletons were eventually torn down in fragments. A blade-wielding skeleton soldier and a giant skeleton armed with a spear were fighting nearby. The blade-wielding skeleton soldier was none other than Yan Luo. It seemed to be taking a lead on the giant skeleton. Puff! Suddenly, a sound rose up in the sky. A spear made up of bone was shot from the hand of the 30 feet tall giant skeleton. It came towards the throat of Yan Luo like lightning. The speed of this spear was more than the reacting capability of an ordinary skeleton. In addition, the tall skeleton had thrown the spear from a tricky angle. So, it was beyond Yan Luo's capabilities to dodge it. Suddenly, Yan Luo's figure fuzzed. It then slipped an after shadow, and avoided the attack. The after shadow stooped to the other side of the giant skeleton. It rushed towards the giant skeleton as soon as Yan Luo appeared. The giant skeleton responded very quickly. It moved its arm, and stopped Yan Luo's bone blade. The irresistible and powerful attack was almost dodged. Yan Luo shook as it saw this. It drew 2 or 3 steps backwards. Yan Luo's figure hadn't been able to find a firm foothold when a green soul flame flashed in the eyes of the giant skeleton. The long spear in its hand had suddenly been surrounded by a white light. Then, the long spear rushed towards Yan Luo. Chapter 153, High Priest. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. A faint green-colored soul flame flickered in Yan Luo's eyes. It then created a slipping after shadow to dodge the attack before the spear with the white light came in contact with its body. Yan Luo had increased its speed several times in order to dodge the attacks. The giant skeleton got angry. It was already holding a spear in its left hand. But, a long tailbone whip then appeared in its right hand out of nowhere. Then, it started to swing it. Several white whip shadows surrounded the whip, and rushed towards Yan Luo. An after shadow flashed once again, and moved aside to avoid the attack as Yan Luo repeated its action. But then, the long whip changed its direction, and followed after Yan Luo's after shadow like a shadow following the body. Yan Luo's figure stood firm. The tailbone whip bloomed like a flower without giving a moment's time to Yan Luo. It then rolled up, and hit Yan Luo's arms and legs, and tied it at the place where it stood. Yan Luo struggled for a while, but it was unable to move. The green soul flame started to flicker in its eye sockets. It seemed to be frightened. The giant skeleton opened its mouth, it seemed to be smiling. It then pulled Yan Luo's body towards itself with its right hand. It smashed the bone spear on Yan Luo's head with its left hand at the same time. Suddenly, Yan Luo stopped struggling, and made a strange move. It moved its head, and welcomed the spear. Bang! A loud and clear sound echoed. Yan Luo's skull had remained undamaged, while the bone spear had scattered into pieces. The giant skeleton looked distracted. Yan Luo took advantage of this, and pulled the bone whip towards itself. It then swung it, and knocked against the head of the giant skeleton. Kaka. A bone-breaking sound was heard. The skull of the giant skeleton got knocked and smashed into pieces. The bone fragments went swirling in the air. A group of green lights flew out of it. Yan Luo exerted its body in midair, and inhaled a deep breath. The flying green lights entered its mouth. Then, the initial green color of the soul flame in its eyes got deepened. Yan Luo turned over and landed on the ground. It then moved its lower jaw up and down a few times. After that, it exerted its body, and freed itself from the tailbone whip. It then changed its direction, and started to walk towards the group of fighting skeletons. In the stone chamber of the Green Tooth Palace Hall, Shi Mu sat cross-legged on his bed. He looked low-spirited. He sighed gently after a long while. It was much harder to remove the curse from his body than he had imagined. In fact, this feat was nearly impossible to achieve. He had come to the holy mountain after so many difficulties. How could he let all of it go in vain? He didn't believe in giving up. He shook his head, and freed his mind of these worries. He then swallowed down a bone-tempering pill. After that, he closed his eyes, and started to practice the art of breeding heavenly elephants. Shi Mu shouted in pain after an unknown period of time. He felt bursts of acute pain, he felt as if his lungs were getting torn. He was twitching and shivering from head to toe. His complexion had turned deathly pale. He clenched his teeth and stood up with difficulty. He then tore his clothes open since his entire body was dripping with cold sweat. He quickly took out a jade bottle gourd from his bedside, and placed a blue liquid on his palm. Then, he spread it out on his body. The liquid penetrated into his bones, and sent out a feeling of chill in his entire body. The red light on his chest vanished after a short while. But, a layer of dizzy light was still shrouding the gigantic python totem. The gigantic snake seemed to have come alive as it slowly began to wiggle. Shi Mu's complexion turned ashen. The things had reached a point where the blood essence of the viper meant to hide the aura of the totem was no longer working in an effective manner. It broke out almost once in every few days. Moreover, the time interval was decreasing in a continuous manner. In addition, the blood essence of the viper had almost been used up. Shi Mu's complexion became pale as he realized this. Meanwhile, in the Holy Snow Palace, the official affairs were being discussed in a hall. This hall was entirely made up of white stones. Skulls of every kind of vicious beasts were hung on the walls. They were adding a wild aura to the environment. A several feet long table made up of black rock had been placed inside the hall. The table looked extremely pleasing to the eyes. An old and clumsy barbarian man was sitting cross-legged behind that table. The old man's skin was wrinkled, and his muddy yellow eyes looked half-conscious, as if he was half asleep. He held 1.5-meter-long stick in his withered hand. It seemed like a walking stick that had been made out of a dried-out branch. Several barbarian men of the 8 big tribes were sitting on both sides of the black stone table. They were disputing over something in such an intense manner that it seemed that they would attack each other. This is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of a golden opportunity. It can be even said that the heaven is helping the barbarian race. This despicable human race won't be able to resist us in the holy war we collaborate with the sea race. Moreover, the fertile soil of the human race will become our paradise. We hope that the high priest give permission for that. A middle-aged barbarian was seated on the left side of the black stone table, his eyes looked like a pair of copper bells. He spoke out in a loud voice, and splashed his saliva in all directions. Humph! You people of the Wild Bull tribe are very good at killing, but very short-sighted as well. The sea race is far stronger than the barbarian race and the human race. If we the barbarian race join hand with the sea race, then the human race would certainly be defeated. But then, we would become the next target of the sea race. We the Golden Feather tribe ally ourselves against the sea race. The high priest remained silent. A man with 3 golden feathers fixed on his head sat on the right side of the table. He opposed the first barbarian and said, "Hee hee. Priest Jin thinks way too much." The soil of our barbarian wasteland is barren and dry. The sea race seems to have no interest in that, right? A man with slender eyes like a viper's sat across the table. He was holding a red bone magic wand. He countered the old man with golden feathers. How's your fierce snake tribe so sure that the sea race won't do anything like this? Priest Jin opened his thin eyes widely, and shot a glance at the old man. No matter what you say, but countless warriors of the barbarian race have died and gotten injured in this holy war. We've fought over the soil of the 3 prefectures of the Dachi kingdom for a long time. But, we finally have a good opportunity to get a large area of fertile land with ease. And, the death of all those martyrs will go in vain if we let go of this opportunity. The man with slender eyes was about to speak when another middle-aged barbarian man with disheveled hair added in a stern voice. He was seated beside the other barbarian. An old man attired in a green priest robe was about to say something. He belonged to the peaceful barbarian race. But, the old man of the fierce snake tribe started to speak before he could say anything. Gentlemen, please listen to me. At first, we should conclude the agreement of alliance with the sea race. Our second move will be to attack and occupy the territory. Then, the sea race would launch an attack on the human race on a large scale at the appointed time. We'll deploy troops in the front line, and send a group of messengers to the human race to secretly talk about peace at the same time. Then, we can take over a large amount of foodstuff, ironware, and other resources, without losing too many of our soldiers. And, we can temporarily hold back our troops if the human race turns out to be tactful. The thin-eyed old man began to speak. But then, he paused for a while on purpose. He looked around, and a shady smile flashed on his face. Then, he continued to speak. The main forces of the human race will shift to the front. And, the sea race would also be busy in fighting. So, we'll take advantage of this, and enter into the land of human race. The human race will then be eliminated in a single stroke. After that, we'll capture their land. The sea race won't be able to say anything to us. The other 3 priests of the vicious barbarian tribes cheered as they heard this. There were colors of excitement on their faces. The high priest sitting on the master seat narrowed his eyes and yawned. Vicious barbarians, this plan of action is no less than playing with fire. The human race has 3 kingdoms and 7 sects. So, they can survive for a long time. Their territory is extremely large. So, they can reside in a corner even if they lose a large area of their land. In addition, if we commit an offense against the sea race, and make the human race hate us too, then do you think that the 8 tribes of the barbarian race would be able to confront the strength of 2 races at the same time? Priest Yanya was dressed in a green robe. He snorted and spoke up in a cold voice. How would we be able to know the strength of the sea race when the 4 tribes of vicious barbarians have always kept away from the seaside? We the 4 tribes of the peaceful barbarians have always been forced to settle around the sea. So, we'll be greatly damaged if anything goes wrong. In short, our beautiful Gauze tribe doesn't approve of this plan. A priest attired in green robe sat next to Priest Yanye. He said slowly. That's right. The sea race had signed a peace agreement with the human race in the past. But, they have now discarded the agreement, and have initiated a war against them. This race isn't trustworthy. A priest dressed in a black robe sat to the right of the table. He was wearing a necklace made out of a human skull. He agreed and said, how can we blame the sea race for this? The human race has been mean to them. They're the ones who went to the sea to hunt and kill sea animals in the first place, the priest of Wild Bull tribe spoke up. The 4 tribes of the peaceful barbarians continued to oppose the vicious barbarians. The vicious barbarians also continued to quarrel with them. Suddenly, Priest Yanya wrinkled his brow, and waved his hand towards the 3 men seated beside him. The priests of the peaceful barbarians stopped speaking. Your Holiness the High Priest, please take the decision whether to make peace with the human race or not. Priest Yanya got up, bowed towards the High Priest, and said, High Priest, please make the decision whether to form an alliance with the sea race or not. a middle-aged priest of the Wild Bull tribe stood up and said. The other priests calmed down. Everyone looked towards the high priest. But, the high priest closed his eyes, he seemed to have fallen asleep. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. The men seemed to have reached a mutual understanding, they showed no hint of a chaos. Priest Yanya and the priest of the Wild Bull tribe remained fixed to their spots. There was no trace of intolerance on their faces. The high priest finally moved the dried-up branch he held after a quarter of an hour. He then opened his yellow eyes. Priest Yanya and Priest Mo asked for instructions from the high priest as they saw this. So, you don't want the dispute either. Today, the 4 tribes of the vicious barbarians and the 4 tribes of the peaceful barbarians will choose 50 names of the low-level Xian Tian totem warriors each. Then, they would enter the forbidden area through the portal of the brave warrior, and hunt ominous beasts. Whosoever gets the most number of beast souls would be considered the winner. You've a time limit of 10 days, the high priest exerted himself and spoke up in a sluggish manner. The 8 main priests started to discuss among themselves. They couldn't understand why the high priest was opening the portal of the warrior ahead of its time. The portal led to a sealed space of an incomparably huge territory. The insides of this place were still ancient in its ethos. Therefore, there was abundance of spiritual energy inside the place. In addition, countless ominous beasts that had become extinct from the outside world existed there. It was an extremely precious place to all the tribes of the barbarian race who lived in the barren soil of the wasteland. So, opening it ahead of its time could cause huge loss for every tribe. Therefore, several priests had conflicts in their hearts about this matter. However, no one dared to express their opinion once they saw the expressionless face of the high priest. The whispers gradually calmed down. Everyone then started to calculate the merits and demerits of the competition. The faces of the priests of the vicious barbarian tribes soon brightened with a cheerful look. However, the complexion of the priests of the peaceful barbarian tribes became a little unsightly. The blood vessels of the peaceful barbarians were fragile. Their strength had always been weaker than that of the vicious barbarians. So, the peaceful barbarians had lesser chances of victory in this competition even if the vicious barbarians got caught up in a war against the human race. 2 people, each from the sea race and human race, can also enter the portal to assist, the high priest slowly added after a while. Chapter 154, Female Saint of the Sea Race. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The 8 tribal priests present in the hall fell into a state of turmoil as they heard the words of the high priest by like. High priest, this order is too impracticable to accept. The portal of the brave warriors isn't only a forbidden place of our race, but it's also the sacred resting place of our ancestors. There's no way that we should allow the human race and the sea race to enter our sacred land. This would tarnish the souls of our deceased heroes and great elders. The priests of both the vicious and peaceful barbarians had been deeply moved by this decision. Hee. I'll obviously not allow them to participate in this competition for free. Convey this message to them. Each of them will have to submit 45,000 kilograms of refined iron or 200,000 kg of food grains. Moreover, there can be at the most 2 participants from the human and sea race. The high priest pursed his dry lips, and spoke in a calm voice. The high priest's voice was brimming with confidence even though he was speaking softly. The complexions of all the priests became dignified as they heard these words. They remained silent for a moment. The sea and the human races had come on their own for the purpose of forming an alliance with the barbarians. They desperately wanted this alliance in order to enhance their strength and manpower. So, the barbarians didn't have any other alternative but to follow this order. The barbarians' wasteland had been suffering from the scarcity of refined iron and foodstuffs since ages. The tribal priests still had some scruples in their hearts, but they chose to remain silent. After all, there would be only 4 participants from the other 2 races against their 100 formidable barbarian warriors. So, they certainly didn't stand any chance against the barbarians. High priest, the quality of the ominous beasts' souls differs from each other in terms of their strength. So, I don't understand how will we determine the outcome of this hunting competition, the narrow-eyed priest of the fierce snake tribe thought of something. He then asked. It's quite simple. Let's consider a Hotian primary level beast soul as the base beast soul. A Hotian middle stage beast soul will be an equivalent of 10 times of the base beast soul, a Hotian advanced stage beast soul will be an equivalent of 100 times of the base soul. A consummate Hotian beast will be an equivalent of 1,000 times of the base soul, a Xian-Tian primary level beast will be an equivalent of 10,000 times of the base soul, and so on, the high priest slowly explained. After that, he shot a glance towards Priest Yanyi. There was a gloomy expression on Priest Yanya's face. The high priest's eyelids fluttered a few times, as if he would fall asleep any moment. The priests bid their farewell as they saw this. Then, they left the hall. The only person left in the hall was the high priest with his droopy eyes. After some time, halfway up the holy mountain, in the Green Tooth Palace, Priest Yanya and the other 3 priests of the peaceful tribes had gathered in the hall. They then started to discuss the countermeasure plans for the competition. They knew that the strength of the peaceful tribes was far inferior to that of the vicious tribes. So, the competition was highly unfair and unjust. They knew that Princess Huowu and Shi Mu didn't pose any threat to them. So, they could be considered to be the capable participants. The 3 priests left the hall after a discussion of 2 hours. There were traces of anxiousness on their faces. A servant stepped out the hall after a while, and started to walk towards Princess Huowu's stone chamber. So, the high priest means to say that we can also enter the portal of the brave warriors. But, we'll have to offer refined iron and foodstuffs in order to obtain the right to enter, right? Princess Huowu looked at Priest Yanyi, who sat on the seat of honor. Her complexion had turned unsightly. That's right. Nobody can change the decision of the high priest. One more thing, whatever you obtain in that mystical place shall belong to you. Priest Yanyi nodded, and spoke in a sinking tone. Princess Huowu's delicate eyebrows creased. She remained seated for a while without uttering a single word. Shi Mu's expressions didn't change. However, he was overwhelmed with happiness. This propitious coincidence had granted a glimmer of hope to Shi Mu. This meant that he could still weave his way out, even though all the roads had seemingly been sealed. Shi Mu had been wallowing in melancholy a while back since he didn't know a way to find a multiple-headed python. But, he had got this opportunity to forge ahead with his plan, and achieve his goal. Very well then. We the human race would like to offer 45,000 kilograms of refined iron, and 200,000 kg of grains. We want places for 2 participants. Princess Huowu raised her head after a while, and said in a resolute tone. She knew that the barbarian race had resorted to a blatant extortion. But, she was left with no choice but to comply with them at this crucial juncture. Good. Our tribes are presently busy in preparing for the competition. I'll send you a message when the portal of the brave warriors will be officially opened. Priest Yanya wasn't surprised to hear her reply. Instead, he nodded and spoke this. After that, Princess Huowu started to ask some basic information related to the portal of the brave warriors from Priest Yanya. Priest Yanya didn't seem to have any intention to conceal anything from her. So, he shared all the information that was needed to enter the portal. The portal of the brave warriors had been created in ancient times. A collaborated magic seal had been performed by several barbarian priests to seal the place at that time. There was a massive space sealed inside it, and this territory still retained the ancient ethos. Therefore, the traces of many ancient fierce beasts that had become extinct outside the portal could still be found in this territory. In addition, it was the dwelling place of numerous ancient ominous beasts. A sacrificial offering was held in the Holy Land once in every 10 years. The high priest would open the gate after the prayer. Then, each tribe would send a group of warriors into the gate. These warriors would hunt and kill ominous beasts in order to obtain their souls. This ceremony gradually came to be celebrated as a grand ceremony by the barbarians. The barbarian tribes attached great importance to this ceremony. It was because the beast souls that were captured in this portal were considered to be much more formidable than the beasts of the outside world. Shi Mu continued his closed-door training throughout this period. He also made occasional visits to the rural market in the vicinity of the Holy Land. Shi Mu bought some materials to make a medicinal powder based on the ancient prescription that he had received from Min Tu. This medicinal powder had the ability to suppress the multiple-headed viper. He also purchased a stack of high-quality paper that was made up of animal skin. He had bought this to make low-level magic charms. He knew by his previous experiments that his speed would be increased by 1/3 of the normal charm paper if the body-lifting charms were to be drawn on such hides. Moreover, Princess Huowu had given him 3 middle-level magic charms for self-defense. It was called the Cold Yin Charm. It was an ordinary water attribute magic charm. But, it was beyond Shi Mu's capability to draw. Shi Mu felt a bit more confident about his trip to the Forbidden Land after he had made these preparations. After several days, in the valley behind the Bema mountain. The valley was pretty spacious. It was 100 or more acres wide. Several huge white rocks stood upright on the ground at a certain place in the valley. They were rectangular in shape, and were nearly 10 feet in height. A dark blood-red magic character was carved on the surface of each of the white rocks. These huge rocks seemed to have been arranged in a gigantic circle from afar. It seemed to be 1,000 feet in diameter. It constituted an illustrious landscape of a huge stone array. But, there was something unusual about these boulders. One or several pieces of rectangular white rocks were overlaid on some of these huge rocks. They were huge in size. They were placed vertically or horizontally, and constituted an extremely disorderly scene. However, they seemed to hold some special meaning. A black altar stood not far from these boulders. It was 10 feet wide. Priest Yanya and the other 7 barbarian priests stood in front of the altar. They all bore a solemn expression on their faces. Their silence indicated that they were waiting for something. 100 or more barbarian people stood in the open land in front of the altar. Each one of them wore different clothing. But, a virtual line that divided them into 2 groups could be seen rather distinctly. They stood in 2 groups on either side. The people of one of the groups were tall and sturdy. They looked far better than the people on the opposite side, regardless of their build and imposing aura. The stronger party comprised of the totem warriors from the vicious barbarians. The other side was of the peaceful barbarians, and consisted of warriors from 4 peaceful tribes. Shi Mu stood in the group of the peaceful tribes, beside Princess Huowu. 7 or 8 strange people were clustered around a blue-robed girl near the group of the vicious barbarians. That girl seemed to be their leader. The girl was roughly 13 or 14 years old. Her skin was as white as snow. She was pretty, and had striking facial features. Her resourceful and shiny black eyes were looking towards the huge stone array in a curious manner. She seemed to be fascinated by them. These people with strange appearances looked like human beings. However, some of them had scales all over their bodies, and some had a fin-like object in place of ears. One of them even had a fish tail. The lower part of his body was shaped like a fish tail. He was a heavily built man with protruding muscles. He was holding a giant trident. These odd-looking people shot a cold look at Princess Huowu. There were traces of provocation in their eyes. However, Princess Huowu wasn't paying any attention to them. She was looking at them with a smile of her face. Shi Mu also took advantage of this opportunity. He started to size them up in an ostentatious manner with a semblance of arrogance on his face. These strange-looking people belonged to the sea race. The blue-robed girl seemed to be the so-called female saint of the sea race. Min Tu had told Shi Mu that the female saint was one of the 2 participants of the sea race. Therefore, Shi Mu couldn't help but look at her repeatedly. A strange feeling bubbled up in his heart every time he looked at her. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling that he had met this girl before. However, he couldn't remember where he had seen her, no matter how hard he tried. Shi Mu was still swaying in the tide of his thoughts when he felt that he was being looked at with a gaze filled with hostility. Shi Mu gathered his scattered thoughts, and raised his guard. He slightly tilted his head to one side, and looked in the direction of the hostile gaze. The person turned out an old barbarian man who was clad in a tribal priest's robe. He held a red scepter made up of bones in his hand. His eyes were long and slender like a pair of serpent's eyes. His shriveled skin looked strange, as if it was covered in a layer of faint green light. The old man shot a cold look at Shi Mu as he saw that Shi Mu had taken note of him. Then, he averted his eyes. The fierce snake tribe. These words suddenly burst out in Shi Mu's mind. However, he maintained his composure. Meanwhile, a little commotion was heard from the direction of the participating barbarians. They then turned their gazes towards the opening of the valley. Shi Mu also followed their gaze. He saw a diminutive old barbarian man walking into the valley with a withered branch-like scepter in his hand. He looked extremely shriveled and fragile. The 8 tribal priests and the 100 barbarian warriors stood firm with deep veneration as soon as they saw the frail old man. The provocative and hostile looks that they bore earlier had disappeared without a trace. Shi Mu was astounded. However, he was uncertain about this old man. Was this trembling and petite old man the most reverent person, and the most renowned man of the barbarian race? Was he the so-called high priest Bai Li Ji? Moreover, he couldn't sense the slightest trace of this elderly man's qi. The high priest looked similar to an ordinary barbarian man. Shi Mu couldn't relate this frail old man with the most respected person of the barbarians. Bai Li Ji was walking very slowly, as if each of his steps was consuming every bit of his strength. But, the barbarian warriors and priests waited patiently. In fact, they were looking at the old man as he walked towards the black altar without batting an eye. Everyone was quiet. The high priest finally reached his destination after a quarter of an hour. Priest Yanya and other tribal priests dispersed as he ascended the altar. They then stood around the altar in a circle. The brave warriors of our sacred god, the portal will be opened soon. Are you ready? Bai Li Ji stood alone on the high altar. He spoke as he swept his vision over the audience with his pale yellow eyes. Yes. The barbarians answered in a thunderous voice. The voices of hundreds of barbarians and totem warriors shook the entire gravel. Their reply reverberated through the valley. The warriors then burst out shouting, and rushed towards the stone array. Shi Mu and Huo Wu looked at each other. Then, they started to follow the barbarians of the peaceful tribes. Meanwhile, the blue-robed girl whispered something to her fellow companions. Then, she too started to walk towards the stone array along with a sturdy man who was half man and half fish. The stone array was enormous in size with a diameter of 1,000 feet. It could easily accommodate over 100 people. It didn't look crowded at all. Chapter 155, The Green Demon Wolf. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The peaceful and the vicious barbarians assembled in the open area in the center of the stone array. But, they were still divided into 2 groups. The 2 sides glared at each other. Their eyes were filled with provocation and hostility. Everyone had soon entered into the stone array. Suddenly, a sound of an abstruse chanting was heard. It was quite difficult to understand. It was coming from the direction of the black altar. Shi Mu and Princess Huo Wu stood along with the peaceful barbarians. Shi Mu looked towards the source of the sound. He saw that High Priest Bai Lig was dancing on the black altar while holding his withered scepter. He was dancing in a strange manner, and on an odd rhythm. Bai Lig's eyes still looked the same yellow and turbid. But, his quivering hands and feet had become extremely nimble. He looked like a different person now. His agile movements made a striking contrast with his previously tottering steps. The surrounding 8 priests knelt down around the altar with a solemn expression on their faces. They then raised their arms, and started to mumble something. It seemed as if they were muttering a prayer. Suddenly, the spiritual energies within a radius of thousands feet of the altar became impatient, and started to move in an abnormal manner. Numerous luminous dots appeared in the air out of nowhere, they were visible but vaguely. Then, they rushed towards the high priest like a massive and surging tide. The mighty currents of these luminous dots were centered on the high priest. They began to swirl above his head in an unceasing manner, and gradually formed a visible vortex. The undulating waves of intense magic power proliferated in all directions. They seemed to be curling and shooting up to the sky like torrential waves. There were several scudding black clouds high up in the sky. These dense clouds gradually started to cover the blazing sun until it was got completely concealed. The entire valley became murky and gloomy. Then, the high priest stopped his strange dance. He was now holding his four limbs in a strange posture. Suddenly, the surrounding 8 priests stopped chanting the incantations as well. However, the people in the stone array became exceptionally excited, their eyes started to beam with an unending eagerness. Suddenly, the withered branch-like scepter in Bai Lig's hand radiated a bright red light. Then, an overwhelming aura was shot up to the sky from this red light. This aura was so profound and majestic that it seemed to possess the strength of wiping out the entire universe. Bai Lig's aura changed in an instant. It seemed as if his body was brimming with a profound and sacred aura. The black and dark blood-red magic characters carved on the huge rocks of the stone array also began to send out a faint red radiance at the same time. Shi Mu was shocked as he saw this unusual scene. Moreover, the high priest's hidden strength had left him flabbergasted. Suddenly, Shi Mu felt a burst of warmth in his chest. He was taken aback. He quickly slipped his hand into his shirt. The blue-robed girl of the sea race seemed to have induced something at the same time. She stood on Shi Mu's opposite side. Her beautiful eyes swept across the crowd until they fell on Shi Mu's face. A pleasantly surprised expression glittered on her charming face, she couldn't hide it. She slightly opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something. Suddenly, a vast stretched red light cascaded down from the sky, and enveloped everyone who stood in the stone array. Then, the red light disappeared in its entirety. The stone array also resumed its original bleakness and tranquility. The open area in the center was empty now. Shi Mu found himself in a dark world. But, there was a faint ray of light in this darkness, it looked like a meteor in the night sky. Shi Mu's body was swiftly floating in the darkness like a fallen leaf fluttering in midair. There was no foothold beneath his feet. But, this state didn't continue for a long time. A short while passed, and Shi Mu felt his body being pulled down by a mighty and frightening force. Suddenly, myriad of stars started to appear before his eyes. They were glittering and flashing in a miraculous manner. Then, his body hit a hard place with a sudden flash, and an explosive sound. He felt a burst of scathing pain in his shoulder. The corners of his mouth sucked in a breath of cold air as he struggled to his feet. The surrounding scenery gradually became clearer before his eyes. There was a vast stretched and dense forest as far as his eyes could see. The trees were so huge that it would need many people to surround a single tree. And, such sky-towering trees could be seen in every direction. Moreover, they were laden with heavy and luxuriant foliage that seemed to have covered the entire sky. Even the bushes and shrubs on the ground grew in clumps. These peculiar features constituted an exuberant picture in front of Shi Mu's eyes. Shi Mu took a long and deep breath. He could feel that the air was permeated with a strong presence of spiritual energies. He had already asked about some of the basic details of the portal and the world inside it from Priest Yanya and Min Tu before he had entered the place. However, the feeling that he experienced at this moment was entirely different from what he had expected. He retracted his vision after some time. Then, he looked around with his vigilant eyes. He tightened his grip on the black blade at the same time. The surrounding area was tranquil. There was nothing unusual about it. Shi Mu felt a little relieved. He then took out a piece of yellow animal hide from his bosom. He had obtained this hide from Min Tu earlier. It was a rough topographic map of this portal. He swept his gaze around once again. Then, his body leapt, and started to climb one of the biggest old trees like an agile monkey. Shi Mu crawled up to the peak of that tree in a fleeting moment. The surrounding trees looked quite small in front of it, as if they had been truncated. So, Shi Mu got a panoramic view of the surrounding area within a radius of several kilometers as a result. Shi Mu had gotten a rough idea of the place where he was at. It was a dense forest, and was located in the middle of two mountain peaks. There was an even more luxuriant forest on his right hand, on his left-hand side was an open land. Its terrain had gradually caved in, and had formed a low-lying land. But, it was a fairly wide area with a tranquil lake beside it. Shi Mu consulted the map, and realized that he was in the southeastern region. Shi Mu continued to look at the map for a while. There was a tranquil expression on his face, his eyes looked as if he was in a deep thought. The map in his hand showed only a little detail of the distinct area that had already been explored in the past. And, that area was called the Forbidden Region of this world. This place was marked with a huge river till the northern extremity of the map. The river traversed the world from east to west. The land on the northern side of the river was called the Central Region. The environment of the Central Region was relatively more dangerous than that of the several peripheral regions. It was because the Central Region was considered to be the dwelling place of many Xian-Tian-level ominous beasts. The portal had been opened several times in the past. However, only the Xian-Tian-level warriors had braved visits to the Central Region. Therefore, the Central Region of this map wasn't as thorough and detailed as the other peripheral areas. But, the barbarians had never spoken anything against this. The depth of the Central Region was the most forbidden area of this world. This place was only visited by a few Earth-grade barbarian powerhouses. It had been reported that there was a huge number of extremely formidable savage beasts there, and that these beasts were almost equivalent to the Earth-grade level. This made this place a savage and primeval area. However, the barbarian people didn't talk about how big this extremely forbidden area was. They only knew that it was a boundless area with a huge fertile land. No one had ever reached its end. Shi Mu's gaze got pulled towards the northern direction. He knew that he may have to enter this forbidden area. And, his prime goal would be to hunt a Xian-Tian-level multiple-headed python. He knew that he would have to undertake an inevitable excursion into the depth of the Central Region. Shi Mu retraced his gaze, and jumped down the tree like an ape. Then, he quickened his pace towards the northern direction. The space within the restricted area was rich in spiritual energies. So, all kinds of precious and rare treasures were found in that place, that too in unimaginable numbers. Shi Mu soon started to discover several kinds of heavenly grasses that were rarely seen in the outside world. Similarly, several rare and ominous beasts were also found in large numbers in that area. Therefore, Shi Mu had no choice but to weigh the pros and cons before making any decision. He decided that he shouldn't waste time in collecting the herbs that could be easily obtained outside. Instead, he should concentrate on forging ahead with his journey. After all, he had a limited time of 10 days in this mystical land. After some time, on a natural stone bridge, Shi Mu stood at one end of the bridge, while a giant green wolf stood at the other end as if blocking Shi Mu's way. It was nearly 10 feet in height. The bridge wasn't very long, it was approximately 50 meters in length. But, it connected two cliffs. Therefore, it was the only way ahead. Otherwise, it would take at least half a day's time to make a detour. The Green Demon Wolf. Shi Mu sized up the giant wolf from top to bottom as he murmured to himself. The stature of this giant wolf looked quite majestic. Its entire body was covered with a thick layer of bright hair. A long green horn could be seen on top of its head. It had eyes like copper bells, they were radiating a blood-red light. The wolf was ferociously staring at Shi Mu with a pair of ominous eyes. Shi Mu's unscrupulous vision had perhaps enraged the wolf. It issued a frightening howl, and swooped down on Shi Mu while making a threatening gesture. It was so fast that its huge mouth had reached Shi Mu's neck in an instant. It opened its mouth, and bit at Shi Mu's neck while exhaling a puff of nasty wind. Its giant buck tooth looked as sharp as a dagger. Suddenly, Shi Mu's body flashed, and vanished into thin air. And the wolf ended up with thin air in its mouth. Shi Mu's silhouette appeared behind the wolf the next moment. But there was still a tranquil expression on his face like a motionless pond. Suddenly, he pounded his fist forward, and hit the wolf's head forcefully. His fist was suffused with a jade-like color, and had a faint metallic sheen. A dull thumping sound was heard as Shi Mu's fist had bombarded on the wolf's skull. The wolf's head had been hit by a mighty strength in a turbulent manner as if its head had been pounded by a megalith. A light snapping sound was heard from his skull, its giant body was struck to fly. It rolled on the ground a few times. A hint of astonishment flashed across Shi Mu's eyes. The wolf would seem to be a Hotian middle-stage beast. But Shi Mu's mighty stone-breaking fist coupled with his own overwhelming strength could only cause a little crack in its skull. It should have been killed in a single blow. A barbarian would have been profoundly shocked if he had witnessed this scene. The green demon wolf was known as a iron skull beast. It was because of its skull was harder than iron. So, a barbarian had never attempted to kill such a wolf by smashing its skull. The wolf issued a painful roar. It then sprang up to its feet. The bright red gleam in its eyes grew even brighter than before. Suddenly, a bright green radiance also appeared on its horn. Then, a green blade wind shot out from its horn like an electric current, and flashed towards Shi Mu at a lightning speed. It was half the height of a normal human. Shi Mu seemed prepared for this attack. He spouted out a burst of white qi, and his attack collided with the green wind. Boom! The qi explosion technique and the burst of green wind exploded, and dispersed with a loud explosion. Whiz! Suddenly, a black shadow darted out of the explosion like an electric current. It flashed and dashed towards the wolf's chest. Shi Mu had thrown the black blade. Suddenly, a blood light flashed. The wolf moved aside to dodge the blade. But it couldn't fully evade the attack. Its claw was stabbed by the blade. And blood started to bubble up from its injury. Shi Mu seized this opportunity, and hurriedly strode to the wolf's side. He then threw a powerful kick at the wolf's waist. It was as solid as an iron whip. Kaka! A bone-cracking sound was heard. The wolf was sent flying backwards. It then heavily crashed to the ground. Its waist looked abnormally twisted. Its waist bone seemed to have been smashed rather terribly. The wolf couldn't endure the pain, and issued a pitiful scream. A person's shadow flashed as Shi Mu appeared to the wolf's side once again. Then, his solid fist bombarded on the wolf's head. Snap! The wolf's head couldn't endure the formidable blow this time. Its skull cracked like a melon with a cracking sound. Its brain flowed out of its head in a watery form. It was red and white in color. The blood-curdling screeches of the green wolf ceased after some time. Its huge body twitched a couple of times before it finally became motionless. A ball of green light emerged from the wolf's smashed head. It was as big as a fist. It then started to hover over the wolf's corpse. A fuzzy miniature image of a wolf could be seen inside the green light. A trace of curiosity glittered across Shi Mu's face as he looked at the light ball. He then took out a bag that was made up of a red animal skin. Some obscure characters of black magic were engraved on the surface of the bag. The sacred snow palace had distributed these bags to all the participants before they had entered this place. It was used to seal the beasts' souls. Shi Mu poured his magic power into the bag. Suddenly, the shriveled bag brightened a little, and issued attraction force. Whiz! The green light ball was sucked into the bag. Shi Mu nodded in satisfaction. He then retrieved his black blade. After that, he wielded it and cut off the dead wolf's horn. The green demon wolf was an ordinary beast with average strength. But its horn was considered to be a very valuable material for making magic weapons. Shi Mu then kicked the wolf's corpse off the stone bridge because the pungent smell of blood could cause further troubles for him. After that, he crossed the bridge, and continued to advance in the northern direction. Chapter 156, A Broken Statue. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The blue-robed girl stood on a boulder on a piece of green grassland. Her dress was fluttering in the gentle breeze. She looked like a beautiful nymph made of water. She carried a pleasant ambience of an orchid in this remote and desolate valley. The goddess-like girl looked a little puzzled, as if lost in a deep thought. She was gazing blankly into the distance. "Is that him?" The girl's rosy lips finally moved after a long while as she mumbled to herself. Suddenly, a shadow emerged in the distance, and advanced towards her with a lightning speed. The blue-robed girl shook her head, and hid her puzzled facial expression. She then turned around, and looked towards the approaching shadow. The shadow continued to grow bigger with each passing second until it finally became clear. It was the half-man and half-fish creature of the sea race. His body was covered with a suit of black armor. His fish tail was swinging nimbly on the ground. It looked like a sea snake. He was so fast that he had arrived near the girl's side in the blink of an eye. "Saintess!" The voice of the black-armored man was deep and hoarse, as if two pieces of wood were rubbing against each other. "Let's go," the girl said lightly. Then, she sprang up from the megalith, and landed on the ground. After that, she turned around and advanced towards the northern direction. The armored man hastily followed her. There was a marshland between two hills in a hilly region. The place was reeking of blood. The smell was so nasty that it could make anyone puke. A dozen or more corpses of yellow lizards lay prone on the ground in the marshland. They were of different sizes. Most of them were cut into two pieces. Blood had flowed out of their bodies, and had formed a small pool of blood in the marshland. A maiden stood beside these corpses. Her yellow cloak was made up of fox leather. It was draped around her body. It was none other than Princess Huowu. She held a water bag in her hand, and was slowly pouring water to wash the blood off her silver sword. But, her clothes looked clean and spotless. There was not the slightest trace of blood on her clothing. She pointed her feet on the ground once she had cleaned the blood stains off the sword's edge. She then floated to the top of a hill like a group of yellow clouds. She considered for a while. Then, she pointed her feet on the ground once again, and drifted towards a certain direction. There was a small gloomy canyon. A fierce fight between 5 barbarians and hundreds of blood-red bats was going on in that canyon. These bats were of different sizes. But, all of them had a couple of things in common. They had sharp talons and long white incisive teeth. They were huge in number. It seemed from afar as if these bats had besieged the 5 barbarians like a fog of blood. Moreover, these bats kept on pouncing on the barbarians in order to injure them every now and then. However, the 5 barbarians didn't reveal the slightest trace of fear. They had made a circle with their backs stuck together. Then, they had brandished their weapons that exuded a cold light. The cold light had merged into a huge patch of light that shielded them. A bat would be cut into pieces as soon as it tried to approach them. The 5 barbarians started to advance towards the opening of the canyon while they maintained their battle formation. 3 of the barbarians were clad in light red barbarian clothing. There was a totem of a giant python on their exposed right arms. They were the tribesmen of the fierce snake tribe. The leader of this small group was a bald man. He had a pair of deeply sunken eyes with tiny pupils. His eyes would occasionally exude a burst of an ice-cold radiance. He was a Hotian consummate stage warrior. The other 2 men attired in red were Hotian advanced stage warriors. They all possessed remarkable strength. The 3 of them wielded a long green whip in their hands. Their whips would trail a shadow in the air as soon as they'd flick them. And, any bat that touched them burst into thin air. The other 2 barbarians were unusually tall. The color of their skin was dark. They wore a soft armor on their bodies. It seemed to be made up of blue leather. Moreover, there was a mark of a black ox's head on their amours. This was the sign of the Wild Bull tribe. It was one of the 4 powerful vicious tribes. It was considered to be one of the 8 major barbarians' tribes. These 2 barbarians were equally formidable. One of them had full braided hair. He was a Hotian consummate stage warrior. Muscles were protruding out of his entire body, his muscles seemed like iron towers. The other swarthy barbarian was at the advanced stage of the Hotian realm. He held a gigantic axe in his hand. The axe looked extremely light and graceful in his hand, it seemed as if he was holding a rice straw. The red bats were quite fierce, and didn't fear death. However, they couldn't penetrate the converged defense of the 5 barbarians. So, they were gradually strangled to death. The unimaginable number of the bats had been dramatically reduced to 100 or even below within a few seconds. The barbarians had reached quite close to the opening of the valley by now. These bats seemed to be afraid of the large column of sunlight that fell on the opening. Therefore, the remaining blood-red bats fluttered, and flew towards a distant place. They looked like a cluster of red clouds flying back towards the canyon. Phew, they've finally returned. This flat-hair scarlet bat isn't even a Hotian level beast. Its souls wouldn't be of any use for us. Still, these bats turned out quite difficult to deal with. An iron tower-like robust barbarian let out a long sigh and said, he was one of the 2 barbarians of the Wild Bull tribe. I agree with you. But, this canyon is the only way to reach the northern region. So, we'll have to pass it at any cost. Speaking of which, Brother Mang Kun's strength is already quite close to a Xian level warrior. How could these bats be your match? Just take it as a warm-up. The bald man of the fierce snake tribe retracted his green whip and complimented with a smile. A gleam of complacent look appeared on the face of the iron tower-like man as he heard these words of appreciation. He then burst out laughing. May I know what Brother Mang intends to do next? The bald man looked towards the exit of the canyon and asked in a casual tone. We'll now proceed towards the depth of the forbidden area. These ominous beasts in the periphery are too weak to play around with. Their souls would be futile to collect since they are low-grade beasts. This year's reward is very alluring. So, let's move on, and hunt as many beasts as we can, the tower-like robust man gritted his teeth and said. In the past, the warriors had been selected by their respective tribes to enter the portal. Those warriors could keep 30% of the total beast souls that they hunted as their private property. This was decided after the completion of the competition. This rule was made to encourage warriors to hunt as many beast souls as possible. But, an unprecedented decision had been taken this time. And, this percentage had been raised from 30 to 50%. Haha, it seems that Brother Mang Kun wants to show off his talent. So, I'd like to request Brother Mang to help me in exchange for all the beast souls we 3 people have captured so far, the bald barbarian said with a dignified look in his eyes. Oh? What's the matter? Mang Kun looked at the beast soul bags that hung from the waists of the 3 men of the fierce snake tribe. He then asked. I'd like to ask Brother Mang to kill someone for me, the bald man said slowly. Kill somebody? Which tribe does that person belong to? Mang Kun's eyebrows snapped into a frown as he asked. That person doesn't belong to our race. It's the male human who has entered the portal along with the princess of the Dachi kingdom. Brother Mang must have remembered him, the bald man said in a sinking voice. I vaguely remember that person. Can it be that this person has offended your fierce snake tribe in any way? Mang Kun nodded thoughtfully as he asked. This person had killed the young master of our tribe a few months ago. It wasn't appropriate to get rid of him in the holy mountain. Now, that he has made it here, we want to settle our accounts by finishing him off, the bald man said in a tone filled with murderous intention. So that's how it is. Fine. I promise that I'll take care of him, Mang Kun gave his word without digging into the details. Wait a moment. Commander Ching Tong, that person's cultivation isn't that high if I remember correctly. He's just a Hotian middle-stage warrior, right? You can send any random warrior of your tribe to dispose him off. Why do you want us to help you? The swarthy barbarian standing beside Mang Kun asked as a thought crossed his mind. That person had killed our young master. He seems to possess some skills. So, we need your help to deal with him. This way, we can ensure the safety of everyone involved in this matter," the bald man replied. "That?" The dark-skinned man hesitated for a moment as he heard this ambiguous reply. It seemed as if he wanted to ask something else. "Very well, where's that man? Let's hurry and finish him off. Don't delay me and the others. We still have lots of beasts to hunt down." Mang Kun waved his hand and interrupted the dark-skinned man's questioning. Then, he said in an impatient manner, "Thank you so much for your help." The bald man expressed his gratitude. Then, he took out a round disc made up of bone. A vivid and lifelike image of a python was carved on its surface. There was a curved scarlet pointer in the middle of that disc. It looked like a snake. The bald man then started to chant an incantation. And, the pointer started to swing gently. It gradually stabilized, and pointed in a certain direction. It was the northwestern side. "Good, that person is in this direction. Let's go there," the bald man said. An ominous gleam was floating in his eyes. He then started to lead the team in the designated direction. An ominous beast that looked like a fiery red wild boar stood by a pond. It was drinking water with its head lowered. The beast was nearly 30 feet in length, and was as tall as an ordinary person. It had giant tusks, and its entire body was covered with scales. These features made it look like an extremely ferocious beast. Whiz! A shadow of a black arrow whizzed past from a nearby big tree and submerged into the boar's head. Only the tail of the arrow was sticking out. The fiery red boar issued a heart-curdling cry as its huge body was sent flying in the air. It collided and knocked down several big trees on its way. It eventually crashed to the ground. Blood started to stream out of its head. Its body twitched a few times before it turned completely motionless. Suddenly, a man jumped down from a tree beside the pond. He was clad in a black robe. It was none other than Shi Mu. He strode to the red boar's side while holding the sky-splitting bow in his hand. He then took down the beast's soul bag from his waist, and held it close to the boar's head. After that, he stimulated his real chi and infused it into the bag. A ball of red light floated out of the boar's head and disappeared into the bag. Shi Mu had already collected 20 beast souls in his bag by now. However, most of them were either Houtian primary stage or middle stage ominous beasts. He hung the bag at his waist, and prepared to leave the place. Suddenly, his brows twitched into a frown as a thought crossed his mind. He turned around and extracted the black arrow from the boar's head. Then, he smashed its head with his blade. After that, he set out hurriedly. Soon, he was walking between two lofty mountain peaks. There was a narrow valley between these lofty peaks. Shi Mu felt that the valley was gradually getting narrower as he continued to advance forward. His eyebrows creased as he began to think if this path would eventually lead him to a dead end. He took out the hide map and studied it. Unfortunately, this place hadn't been marked on the map. Shi Mu turned around, and pondered over his next plan for a while. He had already walked deep into the valley. It would cost him a great deal of time if he thought of returning from there by following the old route. He finally decided to continue to move forward after a moment's hesitation. The more he proceeded, the narrower the valley became. It seemed as if the entire valley had been shrouded in an unending darkness. This darkness had been caused by the huge shadows of the two towering peaks that stood on both sides of the valley. Moreover, numerous trees and dense vegetation could be seen in the middle of the canyon. A thick layer of withered leaves like a piece of cloth seemed to have covered the entire ground. It looked as if these leaves had been lying there for a long time. They exuded screeching sounds as they were stepped on. Shi Mu's eyebrows wrinkled as he saw this. However, he continued to move forward. He finally came to a stop after half an hour. There was a bitter smile spread across his lips. He stood on a withered tree that lay on the ground. The canyon was closed from the front as he had expected. There was no path to go any further. Moreover, the cliffs that stood on either side of the canyon were precipitous and extremely high. So, it was also difficult to guess how long it would take to climb up to get to the top. In addition, it was uncertain that whether or not Shi Mu will be able to find an outlet if he began to crawl up. Shi Mu sighed and decided to return by following the old route. Suddenly, he caught a sidelong glimpse of a black object that was hidden in the nearby bushes. It looked smooth and round. But, it was unclear what that thing was. Shi Mu's eyebrows plunged into a frown. He pushed his way through the bushes and walked in that direction. He was startled as he saw the object clearly. That black object was roughly 1 foot in size. It looked quite old. It seemed to be a fallen part of a statue. Shi Mu's face revealed a startled look. He had only seen a desolate primitive world since he had entered the forbidden area. But, this statue seemed to be man-made. Chapter 157, The Mystical Stone. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Is it possible that this thing belongs to the barbarians' ancestors? Shi Mu murmured to himself as he gazed at the black piece of statue. He then looked towards the surrounding woods, a thoughtful look flashed across his eyes. He strode forward towards the left. He brushed his way through thistles, thorns, and thick patches of grasses. He soon arrived before a large piece of the statue. It seemed to be the upper part of the statue. It lay obliquely on the ground amid dense bushes. Shi Mu didn't identify these parts to be belonging to an animal or a bird. It rather seemed to be a sculpture of a strange monster. It was half human and half beast. There were 2 long ears at the top of its head. Its canine teeth protruded out of its mouth. In fact, these features somewhat illustrated the image of a werewolf. Shi Mu's eyebrows creased. The appearance of the statue resembled the strange and distorted appearance of the totem warriors when they were under the effect of their totems. This statue seemed to be made by some barbarian ancestor. Shi Mu looked towards the woods. He discovered that several broken parts of the statue were scattered over the place. Moreover, there seemed to be more parts lying further ahead. Shi Mu was surprised. He started to advance in that particular direction. The deeper he entered into the forest, the more fragments of stones appeared before his eyes. They were scattered disorderly on the ground. Those fragments seemed to be the other parts of the same statue. Several stone columns and dilapidated walls could also be seen lying on the ground along with them. Shi Mu was awestruck. He eventually quickened his pace. The surrounding trees grew scarcer as he strode deeper into the forest. He soon found himself stepping out of the forest. But, he was left startled at what he saw. A vast open area in the middle of the forest appeared before his eyes. A dilapidated megalith building could be seen in the center of that vacant place. It was built against the wall of the mountain. It seemed to be a vestige of some ancient barbarian culture, or period that had been left behind in time. Shi Mu approached the crumbled building. He found a few small altars, temples, and other things in the ruins. There was a stone building with a dome in the middle of the remains. It looked relatively preserved. More than half of this building had collapsed, but it was still in a better condition than the adjacent buildings which had completely collapsed, and had turned into ruins. These crumbled buildings around the dome looked like numerous stars clustered around the moon. Shi Mu swept his vision over the ruins. And, his eyes eventually fell on the dome. He saw that more than half of the building had already crumbled to dust. However, 100 feet statue stood upright inside it. Shi Mu's eyes flashed. He noticed that this statue had a little similarity with the broken parts that he had seen earlier. Both of them looked like a half-human and half-beast. This statue's face bore a little resemblance to a person's face. But, it had ferocious and contorted facial features. It had a pair of glaring eyes, and fierce buck tooth that stuck out of its huge open mouth. There were 2 long and curved horns like that of a goat's at the top of its head. Even its ears were a lot similar to a goat's ears. The upper part of its body was bare. But, it was laden with powerful and protruded muscles. Its hands were exactly like human hands, but its feet bore a striking resemblance to a goat's hooves. One of the arms of the statue was raised high, the other one was hung alongside its body. It held a flute-like thing in its raised hand. But, there were only 3 holes in it. It was hard to tell what that thing was. However, what surprised Shi Mu was the completeness of the statue. It was extremely well preserved, and made a stark contrast with the dilapidated remnants in its periphery. Shi Mu observed the statue from top to bottom several times. After that, he looked at the face of the statue once again. He continued to gaze at it for a while. Suddenly, a fit of dreadful aura attacked him. The aura was so profound and imposing that Shi Mu found it difficult to breathe under its overwhelming pressure. He felt a shiver run down his spine. He hastily averted his eyes from the statue. His body then slowly returned to its normal state. Shi Mu felt an overwhelming fear in his heart. But, a trace of happiness surged in his heart at the same time. This statue seemed to have the ability to manipulate one's mind. This vestige wasn't a trivial matter, it couldn't be taken lightly. In fact, it seemed to hold monumental significance to the barbarians in those days. Shi Mu didn't look at the statue again. Instead, he stepped into the ruins, and began to rummage through the things that were scattered everywhere around him. He soon finished exploring the entire place. But, he didn't find anything important in the relics. A trace of disappointment appeared on his face. Everything found in the place was either the debris of the crushed stones and buildings, or rotten woods. There wasn't a single valuable thing around. Shi Mu was reluctant to admit his defeat. So, he started to explore once again. However, the result remained the same. His facial expression changed a number of times. Finally, a wry smile spread across his mouth. He felt that he was being overly avaricious. He was about to turn around and leave. Suddenly, he caught a sight of a faint red glimmer from the corner of his eye. This red gleam was being exuded by the statue's hand that hung alongside its body. Shi Mu strode in that direction, and discovered that the faint red light in the statue's hand was coming from a fiery red stone. It was as big as a fist. It couldn't have been found if Shi Mu hadn't been excessively attentive. Suddenly, Shi Mu was struck by a strange idea. He clenched his teeth, and leapt forward to grab the stone. He took the stone, and started to run towards the road. He continued to run madly until he left the ruins several feet behind. He finally came to a stop, and heaved a sigh of relief as he felt that there was nothing strange behind him. He then held the stone before his eyes, and sized it up carefully. The stone had a texture of fine red lines on its surface. They looked like veins. Those veins-like red lines were flickering as if the stone was alive. It felt warm to the touch. It looked rather strange. Anyone could tell at a glance that it wasn't an ordinary thing. Shi Mu sized up the stone several times. But, he couldn't find anything specific about it. Hence, he carefully kept the stone with him. He thought that he should no longer linger there. So, he quickened his steps, and advanced on the way that he had come from. Meanwhile, a group of 5 barbarians showed up at the entrance to the valley. It was the same valley that Shi Mu had chosen to enter. These people were the totem warriors of the Fierce Snake tribe and Wild Bull tribe. The bald barbarian of the Fierce Snake tribe held the bone disc in his hand, and looked at it. The snake-shaped pointer on its surface was pointing towards the depth of the valley. It looks like he's inside there. The bald man closed his eyes and considered for a moment. Then, he opened his eyes and spoke. Look at this terrain. This place isn't even marked on the map. It ought to be a dead end. Hee, it'll be much easier to grab him now. This will also save us a lot of time. There's no way that we can let him slip out of this valley. A thin man of the Fierce Snake tribe took out an animal hide map, and issued some hollow giggles as he looked at it. So what are we waiting for? Let's forge ahead. Mang Kun snorted coldly as he said. His face revealed a discontented expression. Wait a moment, the dark-skinned man of the Wild Bull tribe called out. He scuttled a few steps, and arrived at the side of a nearby pond. The corpse of a huge red wild boar lay on the ground. There was a deep scar on its head as if it had been smashed by a blade-like weapon. The boar's head seemed to be almost cleaved into 2 pieces. The Red Flame Warrior Boar, the man blurted out the boar's name. He seemed to be profoundly startled. The others barbarians strode over, and saw the corpse of the boar. Their complexion also changed. Just look at the size of this warrior boar. This boar seems to be at the advanced stage of the Hotian realm. It seems that it must have been killed in one fell swoop. The bald man's complexion became dignified. That guy Shi Mu is indeed strong. We can't be careless while dealing with him. Humph. He has merely killed a red flame warrior boar. There's no need to make so much out of nothing. Let's hurry up and kill him quickly. I've already wasted a lot of time, Mang Kun snorted. Then, he turned around, and walked in the direction of the canyon. The dark-skinned barbarian hesitated. But, he followed after him. A trace of suspicion streaked across the bald man's eyes as he looked at the corpse of the boar once again. He felt that something wasn't right. But, he couldn't figure it out. Therefore, he shook his head, and tried to kick this matter out of his mind for the time being. Then, he proceeded towards the canyon along with his fellow tribesmen. In the depths of the canyon, Shi Mu scuttled towards the exit of the valley with light footsteps. Suddenly, his body froze on the spot as he passed through a clump of dense bushes. He looked ahead with a dignified look on his face. A pale golden gleam lit up in his eyes. His complexion profoundly changed the next moment. His body flashed, and he quickly hid behind a huge old tree. Then, he started to climb up the tree like an agile ape. He stopped after he had crawled halfway up the tree. He then looked ahead into the distance. There were numerous shadows of huge and dense trees in the canyon. But, they couldn't block Shi Mu's line of sight. He could clearly see 5 barbarians at a distance of several hundred feet from the place where he stood. They were rapidly approaching towards the valley from the entrance. These barbarians wore a desolate and menacing look on their faces. They were looking around vigilantly as if they were searching for something. The fierce snake tribe, Shi Mu muttered as his eyes fell on the snake totem that was carved on the right arms of the 3 men. Shi Mu closed his eyes, and recalled the cold and vicious eyes of the fierce snake tribe's chief. Shi Mu had seen those malicious eyes before he had set foot in this forbidden land. He opened his eyes. His eyebrows creased, and a cold gleam crawled across his eyes. Shi Mu jumped down the tree after a moment of consideration. He then took out the sky-splitting bow, and hid behind the dense bushes. The 3 barbarians of the fierce snake tribe were taking the lead. Suddenly, the bald man stopped. He raised his hand, and signaled the others to stop. He then tilted his head, and tried to hear any sound. "What's the matter?" Mang Kun frowned and asked. The bald man didn't reply, and continued to listen for a moment. A hint of doubt appeared on his face. He had faintly heard a strange sound a moment ago, but it had been fleeting. So, he couldn't catch it. He began to suspect whether he had misheard it. What a pity! The round disc that he held in held hand could only detect a rough direction, it couldn't be used for short distances. This disc had been given to them by the priest of their tribe. Everyone must be on their guards. "I'm afraid that the opposite party has sensed us," the bald man sighed secretly. He then said, "Whiz!" Suddenly, a faint rustling sound was heard from the woods. And, a black shadow flashed past their eyes. "Over there! Pursue him!" The bald man's eyes congealed. His heart brimmed with overwhelming happiness. His body flashed, and he pounced forward. He then rushed in the direction where the shadow had disappeared. The other barbarians had also noticed a person's shadow that had flashed amid the woods. Therefore, they also sprang in the same direction. The 5 men were extremely quick. Their figures flashed a few times before they arrived at the place where the shadow had vanished. But, the place was completely empty. There was no trace of any person. "Up there!" The bald man glanced all around. Suddenly, his eyes caught a glimpse of a shadow that was hidden on top of the tree. He then shouted out loud. He wielded his arm, and the green whip in his hand sprang up like a poisonous snake. The whip then transformed into several whip shadows, and these shadows bombarded towards the top of the tree. The other 4 men also launched their attacks as soon as they heard the bald man's words. The branches and leaves of the tree shook because of the sudden bombardment of various attacks. This revealed the hidden black shadow. However, that thing wasn't the person's shadow. Instead, it was a cloak that was made up of a grey wolf hide. The bald man and others were startled. Mang Kun snorted coldly. His gigantic axe darted high up in the sky the next moment like lightning. It shredded the hide cloak into several pieces. The fragments of cloth filled the sky for a moment. Suddenly, a dull thumping sound rang out from the whirling shreds. Then, a kind of an unknown white powder sprinkled from the sky, and enveloped the 5 barbarians. The 5 barbarians had been gazing at the shreds that were whirling in the air. So, their eyes were invaded by the white powder before they could understand anything. They felt a fit of acute pain in their eyes. And, they eventually started to issue pitiful yells. Whiz! A shrill whistling sound was heard. Watch out for the arrows! The bald man's eyes were still closed due to the severe pain. But, he still caught the shrill sound with his keen ears. His body moved aside, and evaded the attack. He shouted loudly at the same time in order to alert the other men. Another couple of shrill whizzing sounds were heard before he could even finish his sentence. Ah! A couple of miserable shrieks were heard. The bald man felt a chill in his heart. He couldn't figure out who had been struck by the arrows. He tumbled to the ground and rolled to one side. Bang! It seemed that the wolf hide cloak that was hung on the tree was a trick. The bald man rolled on the ground, and moved several feet away from the danger zone. He still felt a gnawing pain in his eyes, but it had relatively reduced. So, he managed to open his eyes. Suddenly, a red blade light flashed, and chopped something down in the nearby bushes. Another blood-curdling screech was heard. It was followed by a dull thumping sound as if a body had fallen to the ground. Chapter 158, Blood Fog. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The bald man's complexion changed. He was sure that the scream that he had just heard belonged to the thin man of the fierce snake tribe. His heart shivered. He touched his waist, and a white light shot out like an arrow from a bow in the direction of the red blade light. It was a boomerang made up of a bone, it was wrapped in a white light. Tut! A stuffy sound echoed. The boomerang had hit a tree trunk, it clearly hadn't hit its target. Suddenly, the bald man's figure flashed a few times, and appeared in front of the tree trunk. But, the attacker's shadow wasn't there. The thin barbarian man lay on the ground. There was a wound on his chest, it was so huge that his body had almost been cut into 2 halves. There was no hope for him. 2 shadows of motionless people lay on the ground near the foot of the huge tree. The bald man clenched his teeth and gurgled. He looked extremely angry and resentful. Suddenly, a burst of clashing of weapons was heard. Moreover, Mang Kun's angry roars echoed from a distant place in the jungle. The bald man rushed in the direction of the sound. He finally arrived at that place in the jungle. He saw that Mang Kun was busy fighting with a man. This man had big eyes, thick eyebrows, and a resolute face. It was none other than Shi Mu. Mang Kun's eyes were closed. Some kind of a white powder could be seen on the outer corners of his eyes. He seemed unable to do anything about it. However, his body was now twice its size, the muscles of his entire body were swelled up. The color of his bulged-up arms had transformed into dark green. 2 curved and sharp cow horns were sprouting out of his head. The black axe in his hand was waving in a crazy manner, and making an intensive reflection. It seemed as if a hurricane was protecting his entire body. The long blade in Shi Mu's hand was wrapped in red flames. Suddenly, the flames transformed into thin but dense blade shadows. Shi Mu attacked Mang Kun in a violent manner. He could clearly hear the sound of activity behind his body. But, there was no time for distraction to see who was coming. Fierce colors flashed on the bald man's face as he saw this scene. Princess Hua Wu, you've come at the right time. Come on, help me in killing this man. Shi Mu's vision flashed as he shot a glance at the bald man. Suddenly, he shouted out loudly. His voice was filled with happiness. The bald man stared blankly as he heard this. He couldn't understand anything. Suddenly, his complexion changed as he realized something. Mang Kun shouted loudly in anger at the same time. A layer of black light appeared on the axe in his hand. He waved his arms, and started to make cuts in a continuous manner. Each cut of his was as powerful as thunder. 7 or 8 shadows of the black axe shot, and went out flying in different directions. Half of them went towards Shi Mu, and the other half went sweeping behind his body. Brother Mang Kun, it's me, and not the person you think I'm. The bald man moved backwards to dodge the shadows. His shout was filled with a sense of surprise and anger. Mang Kun's face revealed a surprised expression as he heard the bald man's words. His hand movements became sluggish as a result. A gentle pop sound echoed. A section of black blade cut through Mang Kun's chest. And, blood started to rush out of his wound. Shi Mu had seized the opportunity of the opponent's distraction. He had come close to the monster while deceiving him in order to strike him fatally. Mang Kun's body became rigid, and blood spouted out of his mouth. Suddenly, a layer of red blade light appeared around the black blade, and drew a stroke. The red blade light flashed, and cut Mang Kun's body into 2 halves. Blood splashed. Then, his huge body swayed for a while, and fell to the ground. Shi Mu's complexion was tranquil. He swung his arm to throw off the blood from his black blade. Then, he shot an ice-cold stare towards the last enemy. The bald man's body shook, and traces of shock flashed through his eyes. He couldn't help, but took a few steps backwards. Your Excellence must have taken orders from the priest of your tribe. Have you come to avenge your young master? Shi Mu walked towards the bald barbarian, and asked in a dull voice. The bald man's expression changed as he listened to this. He drew another step backwards. If that's the case, then go and see your young master. A vicious look flashed across Shi Mu's eyes. His figure flashed, and appeared in front of the bald barbarian in the blink of an eye. The black blade in his hand flashed a red light, and issued 13 cuts of red blade light in layers. The bald barbarian felt as if he was being pressed down by Shi Mu's formidable and imposing aura. His body responded in a slow manner before the blade reached it. Then, the whip in his hand flashed with a loud howl. It flashed a vague shadow of the whip, and then covered the entire whip. An ear-piercing sound echoed as the green and red lights collided. Shi Mu's attack had been resisted in a forceful manner. Shi Mu's pupil shrank. He then urged his real chi in his hand, and launched another strike. Suddenly, the 13 blade lights transformed into a 10 feet long flame of blade shadow this time. It then chopped down on the bald barbarian. A burning hot blade air hit the bald man in his face even before the blade light had arrived. The bald barbarian was startled. Suddenly, a layer of green light appeared on the whip in his hand. Several thick whip shadows emerged as he waved his arm. It forged ahead towards the flame of the blade light. The red-colored python totem on his right arm flickered at the same time, and red-colored thin scales began to appear on his body. He seemed to have activated his totem power. But, he shot a glance at Shi Mu before he could complete the activation. One of Shi Mu's hand was holding the blade. And, a half-foot-long black cylinder appeared in his other hand all of a sudden. Shi Mu aimed it towards the bald man. A trace of fear appeared in the bald man's eyes. Shi Mu shook the black cylinder, and a piece of black on was shot out. Then, a burst of whistling sound rose. It sounded like a demon's howl. It was then shot towards the bald man's chest with an earth-shattering power. The distance was so less that it was impossible to avoid this attack. A loud sound echoed. The black on's shadows penetrated through the red-colored scales on the bald man's body without any difficulty. The bald man's body was hit so hard that it went out flying upside down, and fell heavily several feet away. Countless small holes appeared on his chest, and his torso ended up looking like a beehive. Blood started to gush out of the holes moments later. The bald man's body twitched as he stared at Shi Mu with immense bitterness. The radiance from his pupils gradually started to dissipate. Finally, he became motionless. Shi Mu let out a sigh. He seemed to be tired. He had just confronted 5 high-level opponents. He couldn't have prevailed over such opponents if he hadn't used a certain number of tricks. He had to pay a little price for his opponents being too strong. Now, he didn't wish to deal with a multi-headed ominous python of the Xian realm. This series of attacks had exhausted his mental and physical energy. His mind couldn't support his qi even though his real qi hadn't been consumed up much. He stood up, and started to breathe slowly. The tiredness on his face slowly started to reduce after a long while, and his face started to regain its usual calmness. He quickly gathered the soul bags from the corpses of the 5 barbarians. Several beast souls were filled in the 5 beast soul bags. However, he only had 1 day to enter into the forbidden area, which was the residing place of the powerful beast souls. Shi Mu was falling short of time. He quickly poured the beast souls into his own bag. Then, he turned his eyes towards the spoils of the war. There were 5 weapons, including the long green-colored whip of the bald barbarian, and the black axe of the huge man. Several charm characters were imprinted on the surface of the black axe. It seemed to be a magic weapon. There were 3 other ordinary weapons. Shi Mu also found a thick stack of gold foliage apart from the weapons. Moreover, he found 2 animal hide magic charms from the bald man's body. Same kind of witch characters were engraved on both the magic charms. They seemed to be the same kind of magic charms. Both were emitting intense magic power, their might seemed to be quite strong. It was a pity that the bald barbarian hadn't gotten the time to use them to kill Shi Mu. Shi Mu took the 2 magic charms, and kept them for himself. He started to think about how and when he could use them. He also collected all the gold foliage. However, he only picked up the green-colored whip out of the 5 weapons since it was easy to carry. He threw away the rest of the weapons. Shi Mu took some rest for a short while. Then, he started to walk towards the canyon. Several hours passed. Shi Mu climbed up to the top of a huge tree in a gloomy forest. His pupils turned golden as he started to look into the distance. He crawled down from the big tree after a while, and started to walk towards the north with quick steps. He still seemed to be away from the central region. But, it was less than 1 day's journey. He could only find a multi-headed ominous python of the Xian realm after he had entered into the central region. Shi Mu inhaled a deep breath as this thought crossed his mind. He started to feel distraught and anxious. Suddenly, he was startled as he felt that something was wrong. He stopped in his tracks. Shi Mu realized that he didn't know his surroundings since everything had been shrouded in a layer of mild red fog. Moreover, it was obvious that the fog was getting denser with every passing moment. Shi Mu was surprised. He raised his head, and looked up into the sky through the trees. He saw that the sky had become blood red. He wrinkled his brows. He immediately recognized this red fog from the information he had gathered in the past. Priest Yanya of the Green Tooth tribe had mentioned about some dangers of the forbidden area before he had set out on this journey. This kind of a sudden red fog was one of those dangers. A person couldn't survive in this land of ominous beasts unless he was a Xian warrior, no matter whether he was a totem warrior or not. This blood fog could make one lose one's natural instincts, and transform a person into a violent killer. Moreover, the blood fog could shroud up the distance of up to 5 kilometers. And, the person could only restore his consciousness once he had left its coverage area. Several thoughts started to run in Shi Mu's mind. He took out an animal hide magic charm from his robe without a thought. He then gently patted on it, and the charm changed into a group of green lights. Shi Mu then hit his foot on the ground, and his entire body became as light as a dead leaf. After that, he rushed through the blood fog. However, the blood fog in his surroundings didn't diminish even a little with the passage of time. Shi Mu tried extremely hard to hold his breath, but he sucked in the blood fog. His mind couldn't help, but became more and more twitchy. A bloodthirsty urge started to increase in his heart. Suddenly, Shi Mu got overwhelmed with shock, and lost his self-control. He couldn't help, but feel extremely anxious in his heart. Suddenly, the sparkling and translucent bead that he always hid in his chest started to shake. Then, a cool layer drilled into his body, and started to rush inside his body. It made his mood settle down. The red light that had appeared in his eyes gradually diminished. But, Shi Mu didn't get enough time to be happy. A shadow flashed in the corner of his eye, and his left hand became white, sparkling and translucent. Then, a white line struck out of it. Bang! A loud sound echoed. The mournful howl of a beast was heard. A wolf-sized shadow of a beast went out flying. A black blade light flashed at the same time, and a couple of shadows were shot. Then, a reeking smell of blood filled the entire sky. Then, several howling sounds were heard from all directions. More shadows appeared, and encircled Shi Mu. Suddenly, Shi Mu realized that these ominous beasts were initiating an attack on him. These fox-looking ominous beasts were more than 100 in number. Their entire bodies were covered in grey hair. All of them had no less than an initial level Hotian warrior's strength. In fact, some of them had the strength of a middle-level warrior. These fox-looking ominous beasts had blood-red eyes. Saliva was dripping from their mouths. They seemed to be bloodthirsty. What was even worse was that the red fog was still curling up from a distant place. More fox-looking ominous beasts had started to appear, their howling silhouettes were springing up from everywhere. Chapter 159, Ominous Beasts Tide. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. It's not good. It's the ominous beast's tide. Shi Mu felt scared in his heart. He quickly swept his vision, and discovered a steep mountain to his left. Golden lights started to flash in his eyes. Then, he turned around, and rushed towards the peak. But, these ominous beasts were unlikely to let Shi Mu get away. They came over to surround Shi Mu from all directions. Hoo! Hoo! A sky-splitting sound was heard. 20 or 30 grey foxes shot themselves like arrows, and rushed towards Shi Mu from all directions. The foxes had claws that were several inches long. However, Shi Mu didn't decrease his speed. Instead, he moved his hand, and flipped his blade vertically. It got transformed into a fiery blade shadow. It seemed as if a red python was hovering and fluttering its entire body. Suddenly, the sky was filled with screeching sounds. Then, several severed limbs drenched in blood were shot out in all directions. Shi Mu continued to kill as he carved a bloody path out of that place. He was madly rushing towards that mountain peak. He was so fast under the effect of the body-lifting charm that he had already formed a remarkable distance between himself and the foxes that were pursuing him. However, the number of these ominous fox beasts was increasing with every passing moment. At least 500 ominous fox beasts had gathered behind Shi Mu by the time he arrived at the foot of the mountain. The beasts had formed a powerful grey current as they had chased him. Suddenly, Shi Mu's figure got wrapped in green light. He then moved in a zigzag manner to climb up to the mountain top. He soon arrived near to the hilltop. He then looked at a nearby black cave on the mountain. He finally felt relaxed. The opening of the cave was only 10 feet wide, it could barely accommodate 2 or 3 people. Shi Mu arrived in front of the cave after a short while. He then entered into the cave without any hesitation. He looked inside the cave with his brilliant eyesight as soon as he entered. This sealed cave was nearly 100 feet wide, and had a narrow mouth. A 5-feet-high rock was placed outside the entrance of the cave. There were scattered fragments of stones inside it. It seemed to be deserted. Suddenly, Shi Mu turned around, and put his hands on the huge rock at the entrance of the cave. His real qi started to circulate in his entire body as he pushed the rock. A loud rumbling sound was heard. The huge rock moved, and sealed half of the entrance of the cave. Now, only one person could move in and out of the cave at a time. Whiz! A grey shadow rushed swiftly. A black blade light flashed in Shi Mu's hand. The ominous fox beasts were sent high into the sky by its movements. But, their blood and internal organs didn't drop out of their bodies. Yet, 3 more grey shadows emerged from amidst the filth of blood. They came over with bearing fangs and claws. Shi Mu's real qi broke inside his body. Then, 13 black blade lights appeared, and went out of the narrow mouth of the cave. The blade light went directly into the flesh of the 3 grey shadows. However, more red eyes of the ominous fox beasts started to glow soon after. They all rushed towards Shi Mu. But, these ominous fox beasts could only climb up to a little height since the mouth of the cave was partially blocked. This greatly reduced the pressure on Shi Mu. Shi Mu held his breath to restore his real qi. He revolved his blade like wind at the same time in order to go steady and strike hard. The blood fog could give rise to this kind of a beast tide as per priest Yan Ye's information. It was effective from several hours to 1 day. One could only survive by avoiding it until it had passed. Suddenly, a violent sound of fighting was heard from a place near the cave. Shi Mu was startled by it. So, he looked towards the sound. He saw a black and a blue silhouette fighting and moving towards the cave. A crowd of ominous beasts was chasing after the 2 people. One of them was a big man, he was half man and half fish. His body was covered in a black armor, and he was holding a trident in his hand. The other person was the blue-robed maiden. She held a multicolored ruler in her hand. The 2 of them were shrouded in a layer of faint blue light. They were the saintess of the sea race, and a sea warrior who had entered in the forbidden area. The bodies of the ominous beasts that were chasing after them were also covered by fox hair. But, their hair was 10 times longer and stronger like a porcupine's. The strength of these ominous beasts was equivalent to that of a late-stage Hotian warrior. These porcupines would stop running from time to time, and shake their bodies to emit densely packed whiskers from their backs. It seemed as if a wave of arrow rain was being shot towards the 2 people of the sea race. A blue shadow of a halberd hit and dispersed the thorns as soon as they arrived near the 2 people. The trident in the black-armored man's hand danced like a windmill in order to protect the blue-robed young girl. A few whiskers would fall upon the big man's body from time to time. Then, a burst of water light would fluctuate, and shoot in the opposite direction. A blue bubble would fly out of the multicolored coral in the girl's left hand every time she'd raise it when the color of the protective cover on the body of the big man turned to faint blue. The bubble would then enter into the protective cover on the big man's body, and would transform it into a completely new one. Shi Mu noticed the layer of the blue light. The way their bodies were blocking the effect of the blood fog was magical. The 2 people of the sea race were hardly 500 feet away from the cave at the moment. Suddenly, the porcupines of the ominous beasts stopped shooting towards them. Then, their bodies shook and shot whiskers towards the 2 people like raindrops. The black-armored big man exploded into a roar as soon as he saw this. The bright blue ray on the trident in his hand emitted a blue halberd shadows in layers to protect the figures of the 2 people. Clang! 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 Loud metal clanging sounds were issued as the wide whiskers and the blue light collided with each other. The whiskers were broken down. But the figure of the black-armored big man also stopped moving. The ominous beasts took advantage of this gap, and shot themselves from the ground. They then rushed towards the people of the sea race. The black-armored man didn't lower the trident in his hand. But, he creased his brows. He had started to feel the pressure now. Suddenly, a divine light was released from the surface of the multicolored coral that the blue-robed girl held in her hand. A multicolored light rolled up, and went up in the air like a silk ribbon. It reached in front of the biggest porcupine in the blink of an eye. That head ominous beast had shed a wave of whiskers a moment back. It shook its body once again, and became ready to launch another attack. However, the multicolored light twisted in the sky like a sea snake before it could launch another attack. Suddenly, it transformed into a rainbow aperture, and got wrapped around the head porcupine's body, making it unable to move. The head porcupine then issued a scoffing sound. Then, a blue ice spear flashed and penetrated through the eye of the head porcupine. It got nailed to the ground. The blue-robed girl followed the same thing. The multicolored light and blue rays emerged from her hand alternately. 10 or more porcupine beasts were killed by the ice spear in a flash. Meanwhile, Shi Mu continued to move his black blade in order to defend the entry to the cave. He felt frightened as he saw the scene in the distance. The saintess of the sea race looked extremely young. But, the water attribute technique that she had just displayed indicated that she was a great warlock. She could lift this kind of heavy spear so easily. So, she must be a spirit-ranked warlock. Their target was obviously to get inside that cave where Shi Mu was dwelling at present. The black-armored man began to hit the beasts on the sides of the cave as and when he'd get the opportunity. After all, there were a large number of ominous beasts. So, the two people could die any moment. The two of them soon arrived in front of the cave. 10 more eyeballs and shadows of blue halberd were shot. The 10 ominous fox beasts surrounding the mouth of the cave fell to the ground at the same time. Your Excellency, we're facing a beast tide right now. I don't know for how long it would continue. Can we also come in and fight against this common enemy together? Colors of a pleasant surprise flashed through the blue-robed girl's eyes as she saw Shi Mu. She then asked in a crisp voice. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows. He then made a decision, and moved away from the mouth of the cave. The black-armored man and the blue-robed maiden moved in as they saw this. The blue-robed girl looked at Shi Mu in an emotional manner as she entered the cave. It seemed as if she wanted to say something to him. Suddenly, a loud sound echoed in the sky as the cave got hit from outside. It turned out that the wide whiskers of the ominous beasts had been launched towards the cave. Several ominous fox beasts had rushed towards the mouth of the cave at the same time. Shi Mu and the black-armored man rushed towards the entrance of the cave. Then, they tightly sealed the narrow mouth with help of the trident and the black blade. The trident transformed into a blue light, while a red blade light was shot from the black blade. This allowed them to protect the cave's mouth from 2 different directions. Shi Mu relied upon his 13 series of Gale Force blade art to resist the swarm of attacks. But, Shi Mu realized that it wasn't as strong as he had hoped since he faced the long-ranged attacks of the porcupines. These porcupines were using the entirety of their energy to shoot the whiskers from tricky angles. It made the situation extremely difficult for the 3 of them to manage on their own. 3 ominous fox beasts got severed into 2 pieces as a fiery blade light flashed in the air. Black marks of burning could be seen on the skin of the beasts. The blood fog swirled up in the air at the same time. Suddenly, 7 or 8 whiskers passed through the blood fog, and rushed from 3 different directions. Shi Mu raised the black blade in his hand. He then revolved it. The blade light chopped 4 whiskers at once. His figure avoided the 3 of the other whiskers at the same time. But, it wasn't possible to avoid the last one. Shi Mu felt a sudden chill in his entire body. Then, a blue light shield appeared around his body. A burst of light swayed outside the shield. It seemed the whisker had been stopped after getting knocking against this wall. It then bounced back. Cold sweat started to come out of Shi Mu's body. He moved his left hand, and took out a golden light magic charm. The spirit power broke out as soon as he activated it. Then, a layer of golden light appeared around his body in a flash. Several black blade shadows rushed from his hand in layers at the same time. Meanwhile, the black-armored man remained standing at the same spot, and continued to defend the mouth of the cave. The blue-robed young girl had applied that layer of light shield to protect Shi Mu. The multicolored lights rolled up in the cave from the multicolored coral. It then surrounded the head porcupine beast in the distant place. Then, an ice spear was launched. It killed the head porcupine beast without even giving it time to struggle. So, the three people continued to threaten the strong porcupine beasts surrounding the cave. These beasts were gradually wiped out. Shi Mu secretly let out a sigh of relief. He could have defended the attacks more easily if those porcupine ominous beasts hadn't been there. Suddenly, he contracted his pupils. He saw a figure draping fox-skinned cloaks over its shoulders emerge from within the group of beasts not far away from the cave. The figure was waving a long snow-white sword in order to protect itself. It was Princess Wu Huo. Her swordplay looked marvelous. However, her defense was getting fainter due to the endless besiege of the ominous beasts. You two continue to defend the cave, I want to save another person, Shi Mu spoke up in a sinking voice. He then waited for the two people to respond. He then shot out a blade light, and retreated into the cave. The black-armored man hummed coldly since there wasn't enough time to talk. The blue-robed girl gave him a cold glance. The black-armored man didn't speak anything further as a result. He doubled the halberd shadows in his hand, and sealed the mouth of the cave once again. Shi Mu put his black blade in the cave, and took out the sky-splitting bow. He then drew out a long black arrow with his right hand, and placed it in the bowstring, as if it was a full moon. Whiz! A light was shot from the mouth of the cave. A fox beast had jumped beside Princess Huo Wu's body. A finger-thick black arrow was shot in the head of the beast at the same time. It flew with a powerful force, and dropped the beast heavily on the ground. Princess Huo Wu felt surprised. She looked in the direction from where the arrow had been shot. She was startled to see the black-armored big man fighting near the mouth of the cave. But then, she saw Shi Mu inside the cave and felt overjoyed. She then started to rush in the direction of the cave. The ominous beasts collapsed on the ground as soon as the black light emerged from Shi Mu's hand. The girl's pressure had been greatly reduced as a result of Shi Mu's intervention. A sword light rose out from the sword in her hand. It then became sharp as she rapidly moved towards the cave's mouth while trailing a bloody path behind her. Chapter 160, Saintess Yang Zhu. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. An ominous glint flashed across the eyes of the black-armored man of the sea race as he looked at Princess Huo Wu. He then aimed the trident in his hand towards her chest. He was looking like a devil. Sugu, get out of the way, the blue-robed girl's sharp voice echoed. The black-armored man glanced at the blue-robed girl with a puzzled expression on his face. He then retrieved the trident, and got out of the way in an angry manner. Princess Huo Wu shot a glance at Shi Mu inside the cave. She then blocked the fierce beast behind her with her sword light. Then, her body squeezed into the cave in a flash. The black-armored man stepped forward to block the cave's mouth once again. 5 foxes were in hot pursuit of the princess. But, he broke the chest bone of 3 of them. The cultivation of the other 2 foxes was extremely high, but they still were sent flying in the air. Shi Mu nodded towards the blue-robed girl. He then sized Princess Huo Wu up and down. It seemed that she had received several injuries on her body. But, the wounds hadn't reached her vital parts. So, he felt relaxed in his heart. This woman could stay conscious in the blood fog. She must have had a rare treasure up her sleeves that must have been given to her by her sect. Princess Huo Wu looked at Shi Mu. Then, she swept her gaze towards the saintess of the sea race and the black-armored man. Strange colors flashed on her face. She then silently sat down in a corner. Shi Mu had just opened his mouth to say something when an ear-piercing howl came from the outside of the cave. The 3 people quickly turned to look outside from where the sound had come. A strong smell of reeking blood was coming from outside. That smell had attracted many other beasts outside the cave. The ominous foxes could be seen everywhere. There were several porcupine beasts among them. These vicious beasts raised their heads, and howled from time to time. "Princess, first take proper rest. Please wait till the beast tide is over. This was an emergency situation. So, Shi Mu couldn't waste a single moment in dealing with anything else. He spoke the sentence very fast. He then drew his black blade, and powerfully dodged to the cave's mouth before Princess Huowu could reply. Then, he and the black-armored man made two divisions to face the enemy. The blue-robed girl also urged her multicolored coral, and formed a protective cover for the two men. Moreover, she started to wait for an opportunity to kill the porcupines in the surroundings. Princess Huowu took out a pill as she saw this. She then closed her eyes and adjusted her breathing. But, she gripped the sword firmly in her right hand. This attack of the ominous beasts was much more furious than the previous ones. A large number of foxes continued to attack. The porcupines continued to shoot furious and sharp whiskers. Fortunately, Shi Mu and the two people of the sea race had established a good coordination in the previous round. So, they came up with a tactful solution, and continued to fight. This round of battle continued for 1 more hour. Suddenly, the color of the sky became dark outside the cave. The porcupine beasts had finally been wiped out. The foxes were still present in an endless stream, but they couldn't make long-distance attacks like the porcupines. So, it was impossible for them to break through the cave's mouth. The three people felt relaxed in their hearts, and let out a sigh of relief even though they were gasping for breath. Meanwhile, Princess Huowu had regained some of her strength since she had taken some rest. The blue-robed girl had also taken some rest as per Shi Mu's suggestion. So, Shi Mu and the black-armored man were replaced by Princess Huowu and the blue-robed girl after some time. And, they continued to switch positions in every half an hour to regain their strength thereafter. The four people continued to defend the cave's mouth from the attack of the ominous beast tide throughout the night. Rivers of blood and corpses could be seen outside the cave. The blood fog gradually diminished on the morning of the next day. The flock of crazy ominous beasts had been cleared by now as if a tide of river water had receded down a mountain. Princess Huowu and blue-robed girl were resting inside the cave at present. Shi Mu and the black-armored man felt relaxed as they saw that the beast tide had declined. Shi Mu ridiculed himself in his heart. He didn't expect that a freak combination of factors would make the human race and the sea race fight together against a common enemy. However, they had survived the attack only because of this factor. The two men glanced at each other. Then, they came out of the cave. They kept away from each other with mutual understanding. Both of them took out their beast soul bags, and began to gather beast souls in them. This kept both the men busy for a while. Each collected more than 30 primary and middle-level beast souls. After that, they had no choice but to give up. They had killed thousands of ominous beasts the previous night. However, the beast souls contained in the corpses had already dissipated since it took them a long time to come out and collect their souls. The two men eventually returned to the cave. Princess Huowu and the blue-robed girl were done resting in the different corners of the cave by now, and were guarding against each other. The atmosphere inside the cave had become serious. Shi Mu forced a smile on his face as he saw this situation. Then, he opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something. Suddenly, a dark shadow flashed in the corner of his eye. Shi Mu felt that there was something wrong. So, the black blade in his hand flashed, and transformed into a heavy black blade light. It then turned towards the shadow to attack. Clang! A metal clanging sound was heard as a portion of Shi Mu's real qi surged up in his blade. Shi Mu shook, and took 2 steps backwards. The shadow didn't seem to be at ease either. Shi Mu was gripping the blade very tightly. So much so that his hands had started to feel numb. He had to take 2 steps backwards to defuse it. Shi Mu moved forward to attack. But, the shadow flashed, and blocked the only exit of the cave like a wall. It turned out to be the half-fish and half-man black-armored man of the sea race. He looked towards Shi Mu and the princess with an evil grin across his face. Princess Huowu had already anticipated this situation. So, she exposed no look of surprise on her face. There was no need to conceal the contradiction between the two sides anymore since the beast tide had receded. Shi Mu looked at the blue-robed girl. He knew that the water attribution magic skill of the saintess of the sea race wasn't shallow or easy to deal with. The black-armored man's cultivation had also reached the consummate level of the Hotian realm. It was hard to determine the outcome of the battle if they would fight. Sugu, move back, the blue-robed girl ordered with a cold complexion. Saintess, the crisis has been wiped out. Then, why? The black-armored man looked distracted and puzzled. Would you dare to go against my orders? The blue-robed girl asked in a deep voice. I won't. The black-armored man was startled. He then got out of the way from the exit of the cave. But, he didn't move much away from the cave's mouth. Shi Mu and Princess Huowu glanced at each other even though the blue-robed girl spoke to them carefully. Young master, I've finally found you. I went to the seaside of the small fishing village to look for you 2 years ago. I didn't know that you had already left from there. So, I thought that I'd never see you again in my life. The blue-robed girl turned her head to look towards Shi Mu and spoke in a merry manner. Who are you? Shi Mu looked distracted. Young master, do you remember this thing? The blue-robed girl smiled. Then, she lifted up a finger, and pointed at a green jade. Shi Mu felt a little empty. Suddenly, the object in Shi Mu's bosom started to shake. His complexion changed. He thoroughly searched for the object with his hand. He then spoke up without thinking, are you that big white clam from those days? Hee hee. I didn't expect that you'd still remember me. I met my master after I left that water area, and turned into the saintess of the sea creatures of the eastern sea. The blue-robed girl smiled sweetly as she saw Shi Mu's shocked expressions. Then, a huge white light emerged from her back, and surrounded her white jade-like body. After that, a pair of wings slowly emerged from the spotless clamshell on her back. Shi Mu blankly stared at the white clamshell on the blue-robed girl's back. Then, past events started to flash across his mind. Whatever he had accomplished in his life was mostly because of this beautiful clam girl of the sea race. The black-armored man and Princess Huowu looked dumbstruck. Who would have thought that this saintess of the sea race and Shi Mu knew each other? Moreover, their relationship didn't seem to be shallow. Princess Huowu became doubtful as she looked at the expression in Shi Mu's eyes. Yes. I have a name now. The clansmen have named me Saintess Xiangzhu. You can call me Xiangzhu. Young master, I still don't know your name. Where have you been all these years? The blue-robed girl laughed warmly and asked. The clamshell on her back started to open up at the same time. This youngster had saved her life in that fishing village. Those unforgettable memories were deeply stored in her heart. My name is Shi Mu. Shi Mu's eyes exposed traces of complicated colors as he said slowly. They had met by destiny in those days. But, things had changed. They were fighting from different factions. But, he managed to speak out his name. However, he sealed his mouth from speaking any further due to his previous experiences. Saintess Xiangzhu wrinkled her eyebrows since she had detected something. She gradually held back the smile on her face. Then, a white light flashed in the white clamshell on her back. Everyone was taken back. There was absolute silence in the cave. Saintess Xiangzhu, this pearl is yours. So, it should be returned to its rightful owner. Shi Mu took out a thumb-sized transparent and sparkling pearl out of his bosom, and reached out to hand it over to the saintess. There's no need to return it. Young master can keep it. Colors of happiness flashed across the saintess' eyes as she saw the clam pearl in Shi Mu's hand. Suddenly, she raised a hand. Numerous blue charms started to emerge from the palm of her hand. Then, 3 blue lights rolled up, and flashed into the crystal pearl. After that, it disappeared without a trace. Shi Mu was surprised as he saw this. Young Master Shi, I'm sure that we'll meet again. Sugu, let's go. The young girl didn't ask anything from Shi Mu. She then turned around, and walked out of the cave. The black-armored man shot a quick glance at Shi Mu and Princess Huo Wu. He then turned around, came out of the cave, and started to follow Saintess Yang Zhu. Shi Mu watched the two silhouettes disappear into the depth of the mountain forest. He then looked at the crystal pearl, and shook his head. After that, he wore the pearl next to his skin once again. Well, now you can tell me. What's the relationship between you and that saintess of the sea race? Princess Huo Wu's voice echoed near Shi Mu's ear. You must have heard what I said. You can leave if there's any suspicion, Shi Mu replied in an expressionless tone. He didn't wish to tell anything about his experience with Saintess Yang Zhu, and his unusual blood essence to anyone. You. Princess Huo Wu seemed angry. But, she thought of something, and returned to her normal state. Humph! Don't tell me if you don't wish to. This princess doesn't care. Let's go. She then came out of the cave with a white sword in her hand. After that, she started to walk in the opposite direction of the two people of the sea race. Several thoughts started to roll in Shi Mu's mind. However, he silently followed after the princess.